I call it, please do the roll call.
Okay. Timothy Welsh,
Here.
Yolanda Hipsky, Tamara Banks, Jason Broughton,
Tamara Banks here.
There we go.
and Jason Broughton. Ruby Bravo here. Joe Brito is
Around somewhere.
Justin Chenault. Rupert Farley,
Here.
David Fowl. East Flatley,
Here.
Robert Fogg,
Yeah.
Glenn Goldsmith, Larry Gross,
Here.
Rebecca Heron, Michael Hoyt, Sandra DeGroot, David McLaughlin, Ken Poe, James Powell, Matthew Rowe, Rodney Thomas, Alan Watkins,
Here.
Clint Wells, and Kevin Wilkinson.
Clint Wells present.
And I have sorry, yes, we have a quorum chair.
Well,
I'm here, Joe Brito.
Yeah.
all right, do I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda? As amended.
Yes. I move to approve tonight's agenda.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Approval of the December 11th CTAC meeting minutes. Yeah, motion for that.
Steve Farley, I approve of the motion to approve last month. Yes.
I just add that I came in after roll call.
December, yes. Yes.
So amend the minutes. Should approve after.
Appreciate that. Thank
Second. All approved?
All right.
Aye.
Extension.
One abstention. Drew. Three of us. All right. Moving on, number 5, public comment. Anyone from the public here want to say anything? Nope. All right, seeing none, moving along. Number 6, VDOT transit reporter problem. Having issues with VDOT today. Rupert?
I'll mention that I did report a problem. I noticed that the lights on Route 3 were out of sequence at one spot, so I submitted it. But I haven't had a chance to verify if it's corrected or not, so I really don't have much to report.
You know?
All right, now staff will follow up with VDOT on that, and staff will also like to put in that a citizen reached out to me actually today about lights at Central Park Boulevard up a route. They felt like the timing, something's been off of late, so they were asking for us to reach out to VDOT on their behalf. So staff
Well,
will do that.
while you're at it, I think the timing at South Point's off.
Okay.
That's the only thing I can understand what's creating the mess down there.
Okay.
Don't you think?
Yeah. Okay. We'll follow up. Rupert, where was your timing issue on Route 3 you mentioned?
Sorry.
Where was the Route 3 issue that you reported?
Oh.
I'll follow up too.
Well, you know how they go green, green, green. Well, one popped on green, the one that was red in front, so.
But do you know the street?
Yeah, what section?
Oh, at the time I submitted it, I knew, but I've forgotten now. I think it was like I'm trying to think of that nursing home.
You know, they can only time the light going one direction.
Well, we'll just ask VDOT to follow back.
Which is that?
Evening. So westbound, let's suppose synchronized westbound.
All right.
All right, any other? See that report of problems? I'll say I thought they did a pretty good job of plowing the snow.
I always have a lot of that problems,
Well,
but I
yeah.
announced them at the Spotsylvania
Yeah.
meeting where the
They're there.
Western engineer. He's always got.
Yep. All right, anything else? Moving on. Number 7, action discussion items. A, FAMPO public outreach and website updates. Eugene.
All right, so we're starting off with CTAC meeting with a very short presentation for setting the tone. So this is our public involvement report for 2024. We have the quick. So this is our public involvement report from 2024, kind of ambiguously. What do I mean by that? You might have noticed the public involvement coordinator looks a little bit different nowadays. Because I'm a different person, I'm not Colby. So there is kind of this dark pages that occurs. As much as I wish that this were a more complete public involvement report, there are just some knowledge. So how we do our outreach, a lot of it comes through social media, our Facebook and Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram follower accounts. Follower accounts are increasing, which is good. Pretty swag if you ask me. Speaking of swag, we did get new swag this year. 500 bags, 72 mugs, 72 misprinted mugs, as you guys know, 100 keychains. These are the things that we give out during our events that we attend. Over this last year, we've attended over 14 events. We have reached over 160 people at these events. Here's just a little list of them, including both of the river crossing meetings that we hosted. Fantastic news for us. We do get a lot of our subscribers to our mailing list during these events as well. In 2024, we've added 626 people to our mailing list. It's also at these events and through the mailing list that we end up receiving a lot of these comments as well. So in 2024, we had over 26 comments at our meetings. Over 80 were submitted during the river crossing meeting on November 20th. Overall, we had over 1,500 survey responses and comments as well. So that is so that's sort of what we did this year. Pretty great. A lot of the way that we do public involvement isn't just through our social media and our mailing list, but we also try to do outreach through our website as well. And it's important for us to have a website that's easy to navigate, that is accessible. Lita, if you could pull up the website. So what we've been working on is trying to make the website more accessible and trying to get more information on the landing page. So this is what's called a staging site. So this is not what the website looks like now. This hasn't gone live yet, but this is sort of a draft that we've been working on. So you can take a look at this, and what we're doing is, if you have a few comments, sorry. Oh yeah, sure. So we have included an additional some information about what FAMPO is, as well as adding some information here. These are subject to change. These are sort of placeholder headings right now. Ideally, this is going to be information that people will want to see. So for example, the river crossing study is information that people go to the website for, but instead of having to go through the menu up here, it can be easily accessible. Hopefully this can be stuff that we can sort of cycle through once we get more information about, okay, the study's over now. What's the next study coming up? Let's put that here instead. This is a lot of the same information that is also on the website about the community's role in transportation planning, how to get more involved, as well as a comment box that has been moved to the landing page instead of being on a separate page instead. Once you scroll further down, you also have the chance to go to each of the committee pages down here as well. And from there, the website has a pretty standard footer. I can figure out a way to make this accessible to you guys, but if you have any comments about the landing page as it is right now that you'd like to see updated, I'll go with that really quickly. If there's anything on this landing page that you don't like, you'd like to see more information on that isn't on this sample landing page, then that would be fantastic to know. If there's anything regarding the menu, any information that you think should be more easily accessible, any formatting issues, then completely open to that. I'm accessible through the fampo@wregio.org email account, and yeah, so we've got our 2024 public involvement report, as well as a new landing page that will hopefully be landing soon. All right, thank you.
Questions, comments?
So what sort of information are you sharing at the booths at things like the Fredericksburg Chamber Expo? Like what is your goal, purpose, and what are you sharing?
At the Fredericksburg Chamber Expo, that was Coley, so I don't know what they were sharing there, but at other events,
Events.
in general, really it is about trying to get more information about what FAMPO actually is, what we do. A lot of the people that come up to us, they have no idea that we even exist at all. So at a lot of these events, it is just a very basic level of what are we doing? How can people get involved? That sort of information. When it comes to those time periods when we do have studies, we also do give information about studies, about the studies that are currently available. In the case of when we go to events that are in rural counties, then we have to shift gears a little bit more. But overall, what we do right now is just that very base level of what is FAMPO.
Okay.
Hopefully in the future we can get into more specifics, but right now it's just people don't.
So on that note,
Mhm.
I recommend that you add to your list every September.
Yep.
The Fredericksburg Area Realtors Association Expo.
Mhm.
It's held right over here at the Expo Center, and every realtor from basically 9 counties
Mhm.
comes.
Right.
And so it's a great venue, especially since realtors need to be as educated as possible.
Absolutely.
Because of the clients that we're helping as they transition to.
Thank you for the input.
Yeah, how many responses did you get from the last study that just closed on January 3rd?
We have about 1,500, I would say, right, John?
Yeah, if you count, so we had, actually, this would be the biggest survey as far as response that we've ever gotten in FAMPO. We got 1,395 survey takers from the online format. When you add in about 50 or so direct emails about the survey, as well as we got a little bit over 100 like paper comments mailed in. So we're over 1,500 responses from the last kind of call for public comment, which that is triple or normal good take. And I think the only other survey that comes close was like a region-wide general transportation, very small, short kind of tell us your general opinions about anything in the region, and that was about 1,000. So it's another 50% increase. So I want to kind of thank everybody around here who's shared the information or talked to your communities, because
I shared.
got a lot of responses. Eugene did a fabulous job of reaching out to a lot of different, we could see each kind of outreach response because we see the little blips in activities as it, and we're like, oh yeah, Ian did a say an op-ed in the newspaper, he got 24. I think Eugene then had a different social media then did a little bit better than Ian, which we're really proud about. So that's always good for me. But yeah, we really like, between some of the work that y'all have done, Eugene's been pedal to the metal on it. That is beyond like amazing. Like I was, if we would have done 600, we'd be like, yes, we did a very strong survey. That idea that we got 1,500 responses in various ways, that's pretty amazing. But I'll get to that in a little bit. That is,
Okay,
and
so you'll share the results?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
This is Tamara. See me for that being there. Eugene, I'll share my community outreach calendar with you when I get back to work. Hopefully I can be back on Monday. I have a lot of community-based events coming up, so I'll share that with you.
All right, thank you, I appreciate that. All right, thanks, everyone.
I've got a quick question.
Oh, yeah.
It is mobile compliant, correct?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yes.
just curious.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've mainly been working on desktop right now, but there are options to, sort of double check. So
Okay,
we've been double checking, but yeah, mobile compliance is
good. Okay, just for
Pretty much
outreach
right.
purposes.
y'all will probably see this as we get closer, particularly when we're building this out to provide us better feedback, because I think out of everybody in this room, y'all, or in the region, y'all might actually use our website the most. So for finding things and being able to point things. So we definitely want kind of the usability of yes, please, for the love of God, don't make me click through a big, deep thing to find what I really want. Tell us what you really want that's high as possible that we can place it. And then if we have to bury the condition mitigation stuff because nobody ever uses it, we can look at our hit rates and where things are coming from. But we want to know, what do we need to put up that works best for y'all when y'all are engaging with the community as well.
Can you monitor what pages are used the most? Do you have
Yes.
hits on it?
Yep, and where they're coming from.
Anything else?
How do you monitor where they're coming from?
WordPress analytics, on the back end of it, you can, I don't know how it does it, how it works its magic, but it does tell us the, I believe, top 25 websites that redirect to our info page.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments for Eugene?
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Eugene.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right, item B, the river crossing survey and endorsement option.
So,
Great data summary.
I mean,
Got it.
this is brand new off the presses. So it's released for the policy committee. So this is actually what's going to be presented on Monday, because the policy committee requested basically the policy results of the survey. Said I would bring it back to you all. They just went ahead and provided the summary on the river crossing itself. Tell me to skip ahead because some of this stuff you've already seen. Percent mode.
Oh,
Presentation mode 25. There we go. We're getting there. It's a new year. Government just so they're gonna provide a public meetings summary, kind of what the process they did. So they're gonna talk about the options. Hopefully I don't have to explain which options are which, but if you want to ask, you can. As well as kind of the information they presented to the public. So we discussed this at our December meeting where they were starting to narrow down the options and kind of the criteria that they were using to get to that, but they were still going to be listening to the public comment forums. So we had our meeting, and that should be November 20th, and I didn't catch that. But they presented to the committee. This is where we had about 150 citizens arrived. That's how we know how many about signed in. It actually could have been a little bit higher, but that's the count for that. And we were able to get just over 100 kind of survey responses from that meeting. So if they had the like sign out sheet, or I mean, not sign out sheet, but this little survey sheet that they had it, we actually had to make extra printed copies. We actually know that some of them got like blank ones got photocopied and then distributed out again. So we were happy to see that we were getting responses from even folks who got secondary and tertiary contacts, so that was great. So we collected that. We just kind of, FAMPO kind of owns that. We collected it into a single file. They provided it to the consultants. The consultants have already gone through and analyzed that and kind of compressed the data to include it within the survey results, because the online survey and the paper one kind of mirrors each other. So we had the public comment period. A little bit over 40 days. I forget exactly how it was. We were able to get 1,300 surveys. We actually had pretty good consistent. We got a huge peak basically at Thanksgiving in the first week after that. We had a huge bump, but we actually continued to get a pretty good pace. We had a little lull in like mid-December, but otherwise I don't think we actually had a day where we didn't get a survey in. So we were happy with that. We did get some feedback that there was a comment of, okay, why aren't we doing a no build option? They're going to kind of speak to that kind of design decision at the meeting. But it was really trying at that point in time, trying to gauge between, tell us your opinion between the options, but we added that. So we were tracking what folks, if some folks said in the comments through email, left a voicemail on my phone, if they did that, we kind of started just tracking that any and every time that kind of came up. We tracked the zip codes. If you didn't know, that was always the first one. That was one of the required questions. And so we kind of had folks self-reporting the zip codes. We have a fair amount of other, which the fun thing with the other is that they're actually mostly mistyped zip codes. But if you put 2240 and then left the next part blank, we don't really know where that might be, but it's kind of like the majority of the respondents were from Stafford. That tracks because that's kind of where a lot of the process is. Fredericksburg also has about 11% of the survey that tracks for their population. They're about 8.6% of the population in the region, so they had relatively a decent response right there, as well as about a quarter from Spotsylvania as well. So that was kind of the breakdown. The only really weird kind of unique one, I did get a zip code from, I think, Kentucky, but again, that actually could have been a typo, but I don't know, but it's a valid zip code from Kentucky. So, but we did get folks from like Orange Park here that they might not live in the area, but they work in Fredericksburg. We kind of track that. So again, we had a large tracking of folks coming to us from social media, some from our direct emails, newspapers, small. And then a lot of others. A lot of others was we heard it from our neighbors. So we're kind of happy that the word of mouth is still coming strong there. So yeah. We got a lot of survey responses that, you know, about half of our respondents live in the area, but your work and travel through is still very high. And considering that we're also tracking zip codes, we still see most of the folks are actually more likely to live in the area and report it than do it. They were kind of mentally not to be doing it. So so some respondents didn't do, but we had pretty good response rate. So 1,300, if they're telling us more than 90%, that's good. We see that the users actually used 95 and Route 1. We're getting high comments back on those users. We actually had a fair amount of folks using the Route 3 bridge. Again, this is the bridge as far as the river crossing occasionally. And Chatham actually had a lot lower kind of representation, but we're just kind of tracking. It's like, which bridges are you used? But you see very like daily and multiple times a day being a fairly high response. But generally, at least folks are using a bridge at least once or twice a week. So that was, we're kind of hitting like, yep, we're hitting our bridge users within the survey. And probably the most interesting thing is that about 50%, if you look at every time or most of the time, experiences some congestion when they're trying to cross. So we're definitely getting folks who have received congestion, but never congestion and rarely at 12%. Okay, they live around here because they know that there's going to be at least some congestion, but that was kind of important feedback that we like to track. Is like, how do you feel that the system's doing? For the reasons why folks are crossing, they're crossing for all the reasons as you can expect. Shopping was probably the highest, but at 22% compared to about 17% for some others. This is kind of tracking with other kind of national statistics of why people are making trips. So it's good to see that schools being at 2% because most of the time for schools don't cross jurisdictional lines. So if we saw that one as a big thing, we're kind of looking at it, but you know, some folks going through college, there is some cross jurisdictional school traffic. Anyway, speaking, folks are moving for reasons that we expect them to be moving. So again, ranking the options, that was the big last bit. And yeah, the way that it kind of fell out is that there's kind of a lot of different opinions on which routes to cross. The consultants haven't picked anything or decided anything from this, so I'll just leave you kind of with the data. But option A received the most preferred ranks, followed by option B2. Option D was actually surprisingly high. We were kind of, that would be at least, if staff is going to make a kind of, we didn't expect that, that would be that. And then option C actually ended up kind of with some of the lowest engagement levels. So on the survey, if you didn't notice, this was weird that it was kind of required because it wouldn't allow you to skip through. So it would not take a response unless you engaged with the question. That's the reason why it was required, not necessarily that it has to make you pick an option, but you had to engage with the question before it moved forward. So whatever you touch first would actually auto-generate to the top, and then you can move and slide as that. So we saw a little bit of activity with that. If there was ever the question of why was that required, is that it would not just accept the, like if you skip through it completely and didn't even look at it, it would not register that as a response. You engage with it.
One thing about the survey, it automatically had option A at the top. So if you didn't click it, I think it would just.
No, it would not register.
Okay.
You would have to click or like you know, it had a drag thing, you had to click it, and whatever you touch first would actually send it to the first place. So if you clicked option C, for example, and that was the only thing you touched, it would just move C to the top. So that's the reason why we're following what was clicked.
But then A would stay at the
Yeah, you
second
would have to
position.
drag.
And a lot of people were saying that they couldn't move the other up. What you had to do is drag it down for it to work.
Yeah, it was a drag and drop survey.
Yeah, but
Okay.
a lot of people were trying to drag it up and they couldn't do it. And so option A was always the second if you couldn't figure out how to
Actually,
pull it up.
Generally, option B was the second. So we actually kind of follow a little bit. As you can see, it's not really, we actually can kind of tell that there's good survey because it doesn't follow straight down the line. You do definitely see like option C was actually was often a third place choice. You saw folks that were dragging appropriately. We did have a couple in the comment that said, hey, this is my option preference, and we went back and looked at that. And the consultants were considering that. So, but that's something, but if you clicked and release, it would send whatever you clicked and release to the top. You had to click, hold, and drag if you really want to rearrange others. Otherwise, it just went as you click 1, 2, 3, it'll just move the next one to the top.
Wouldn't do that. It did that for me on the first option, but then the next option, you had to actually drag them down instead of up. So most people didn't understand that from the comments that I got on Facebook.
So yeah, and finally, in the responses, after kind of getting a push out to try to reach out to anybody with we don't want any no build options. We had 54 responses saying no build. That actually kind of tracks with previous kind of surveys. Probably one of the more interesting things that kind of came out of this is this actually tracks with a lot of our previous survey results. Like we're not seeing a huge, big shift, redistribute, like from previous things. Everything's kind of falling in line that we're getting a consistent answer throughout. But the consultants have this, they're going to go through this in greater detail and work on that. So we're going to go through comment sections. So these were some of the ones that they kind of pulled out as being kind of important. So there was a lot of comments over safety along Celebrate Virginia Parkway, comments over different types. And folks had concerns over like environmental and historic preservation. And then there was some along with the no comments, very strong preference of whether or not either you should have built this yesterday or we never need to build this while we build this. So we're actually seeing kind of both directions kind of cool. So next steps, they're reviewing this. I mean, they did an amazing job going from being able, like, I sent them this step, like the survey closed at basically 11:59 Friday night. I sent them the information from the survey at Saturday morning. I think Eugene sent we sent the bulk of the mailed in comments to them on Friday, and then anything postmarked, we kind of shoveled the ones that kind of trickled in the weather and everything to them, and they've been able to update this to get this out this week. So we're still a little bit far out as far as doing the final process, but that's kind of where that stands. So I'll turn it back over to the chair and let y'all decide what you want to end. So
Comments or questions for John? Seeing none, the next item on the agenda is this endorsement option. John, please advise us as to what is expected of us on the policy committee on Monday.
If I may, are we gonna hear his presentation before we make it?
Should we listen to our presentation before or move it up the ladder?
Change the agenda.
So I make a motion to amend the agenda to allow Mr. Watson to give his prior to the endorsement decision.
Second.
All second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Al, you're up, buddy.
Gee, I know no one's ever heard me talk before.
Mhm.
On the recording.
Okay, basically what I wanted to do is review the things that we had spoken about beforehand at the October meeting and slightly in November, but especially what we talked about at the December meeting. So we had the opportunity to revisit it before we actually make our decision. For example, modifying the routes was one of the things that we discussed a little bit. Whereas I had wanted to, or I had mentioned that I had moved option A further east. The reasons for that basically are listed down here. It's this darker purple one is the existing and that is on using. The orange one, you see over there. And thank you very much for having the projector work a lot better. So these are the existing ones from the consultant. These are the ones that are listed as the reasons that option A might be moved a little bit. One of the things that I talked about was the fact that option A in the consultant's plan is very close to a stream right in this particular area. It's also, because it's a stream, down in a gully. And if it winds up being in a gully, such as what we see right here, you're going to see this, rendering that basically shows that there are sight lines where the people in traffic or on the road would lose sight of what might be coming in from the opposite direction. Because down in the lower area, the overpass would tend to block it.
Yeah, that's a bad picture of that. If you looked at it through the PDF, you could actually see.
Probably on your handout.
Much better on the hand.
Yeah.
The alternative, if option A gets moved to a higher elevation, is here at the peak of the hill, you would not lose any sight lines of oncoming traffic. So that's one of the reasons that was set up.
Can I add something here?
Sure.
Okay.
Please
Well,
interrupt
since
me
it's
as many times as possible.
okay, since it's being built next to a stream that feeds into that beautiful waterfall there, I had to bring the picture because the view from your graph doesn't look that good, but there's a picture there. And the situation is about a third of a mile of stream is going to parallel the road. And it's within the RPA. So, and if they're going to build the elevation of the road up for an overpass, that's a lot of dirt that's going to be moved next to the stream. So what's going to happen is the first rainstorm that comes around, it's going to wash all that silt into the stream, and it's going to feed right to the waterfall, and we're just going to get silted up, because right now that waterfall has one of the clearest streams in Stafford County. I mean, I got water samples and it looks just like that water bottle right there. But, and that's my opinion.
Okay, moving on. This is broken up into option B here and option C. Earlier on, even longer before had made the presentation here for the CTAC meeting, I had created, when I saw that option B1 was going to potentially interfere with the Silver Company's project, I said, well, it would be nice to be able to kind of work with them so we can actually potentially provide them with access to the road somehow. And also at the same time, not interfere with where their residences were supposed to go. So what I created a long time ago was down from the southern part of the Celebrated Virginia Parkway. This is essentially where the clubhouse is right now. That this green one, which I had created, would use the high elevations that we had there, and then it would cross perpendicularly across the river, which saves the length of the bridge, and then curl around and miss the other neon project that the Silver Company is building as well. So it winds up having a much shorter bridge than what option B2 does. And it also does not interfere with any of the property that was meant to be for this particular development. So I just wanted to kind of point that. Again, this is a corridor essentially that was used to evaluate for option B1 and B2, but I don't see any particular reason why this particular path could not necessarily be used as well. Okay, because again, it shortens the bridge, it uses high elevation, which means that the ground doesn't have to be rising. The other thing is too, option B1 still slightly goes through the development property that the company had. Here it uses this future site and the current site, and it splits it right down in the where the separation was supposed to be. The same thing for option C. The only thing that's a little bit different than I had is again missing this property that the solar company meant to use to be able to avoid it somewhat. And then the big change would be the option D change that we spoke about at length. Whereas since option B1, B2, and C utilized the Celebrate Virginia Parkway, the southern part of that, it made no sense to me why we had to go through the entire process of going through this land development up here, widen Green Bank and impact the 63 homes along there, and then go down to the southern part of Cannon Ridge before crossing over and connecting to Carlsley Silver Parkway. Why not use the existing Celebrate Virginia Parkway, use the same lower section, and then just kind of avoid the project that's being developed, and then again, cross over, use these elevations and do that. It saves about 1.7 miles on Green Bank that would be widened, so we don't disturb that. It avoids all the necessary construction that would have to take up there. It really eliminates a lot of road construction that would normally take place if D was used as it was currently set up. The other thing that I would say is that one of the things that I considered as well, especially since it was brought up at the December meeting, the opportunity to actually separate where it goes down to the southern part of Cannon Ridge. So we would potentially have an opportunity for it to go south across the river directly. And I believe it was going to cross over River Road and then connect on Route 3. I don't remember exactly which particular area it is, but I think it was by Gordon Road somewhere.
Near Chancellor Village, right across from Chancellor.
Okay, right. Okay. Obviously, much more expensive to have to do something like that. But ultimately, I think the impact on regional transportation would be substantial. Just giving it 2 access points instead of just the one that would be on Gordon Sheldon. Oh, not Gordon Sheldon. On Carlsley Silver. Okay. Okay. For the bicycle and pedestrian use, and we talked about this briefly. Okay. Here, as you can see, I'm using option D, connecting off of Celebrate Virginia Parkway as well. An example of the shared use crossing that you would have the 4 lanes, and then you'd have a bike and pedestrian path on the side. Consideration should be made regarding what's going to happen if you used option A. Again, this winds up being 370 yards away from Interstate 95. If you're standing on the bridge, imagine looking to the left, looking to the right. You look one way, you see the I-95 bridge and hear it specifically, and then you have to look in the other direction towards where the river would be here. Whereas options B1, B2, C, or D, if one of those were selected, you'd be able to look to your left and right and see nothing but river, and you wouldn't be able to hear the same amount of noise as you would be if you were in close proximity to, the I-95 bridge.
Quick question there, the pedestrian section is gonna, or section, it's gonna be on one side, right? It's not gonna
Correct.
be on both.
Yeah, they wouldn't do it on both sides, similar to the FAMPO bridge, pretty much, I think. that's what the plan was.
Okay, speaking of traffic noise, not only do we want to not have the traffic noise on the pedestrian path on the bridge, but we don't want the traffic noise in the Rappahannock River Valley. And the situation is, when you have roads that parallel the river like this on both sides, this, dips down, so you have these roads paralleling the river, then you're gonna have a turn here. And so there's gonna be more braking and more acceleration, so there's gonna be more sounds in the river valley than just a straight line going across.
So again, for pedestrian and bicycle use, having a shared use, kind of a path like this, just have consideration for those who might want to use the bridge for that particular purpose. On this particular slide, this is something that we kind of showed before several times, because there had been concern about the viability of using roads such as Elevated Virginia Parkway to handle the additional traffic that the river crossing would bring. And again, it was basically disclosed as far back as in 1999 that it was designed and built in 2003 to handle 66,500 vehicles. And yet at that time, only handling 7,000 vehicles at that time. And it has so many other different particular things, such as, the lighting, the pathway, the sidewalk that could be used for pedestrian and bicycle crossings and everything else. And because already it has 5 different entrances onto Celebrate Virginia Parkway, and if Commerce Parkway was extended, it would have 6. So that creates a nice grid option that you wouldn't otherwise get.
Jason has his hand raised.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, hi, thank you. So I have 2 questions, one of which I had put in the chat a bit ago, but I have a secondary question. So the first one that I put in the chat is, how set in stone are the proposed A, B1, B2, C, and D actual lines that we see on the consultant's recommendation? How hard and fast are those lines? And second, when we're talking about bicycle pedestrian use, are we looking at an intended use for commuting or recreation, or a combination of both as a primary for those bicycle pedestrian lanes?
All right, John Rideout speaking here. I'll answer the second one first. It's transportation focused. So this, just to be eligible for transportation dollars, it could not just be solely for recreation. So that would be any users. Now, I would expect a healthy mix of both folks who would use it as for transportation, making trips across the river between residential areas and a commercial area, for transit as well as connecting into that grid, as well as I would expect recreational users as well, but it would be required to have a transportation focus requirement just for the eligibility of that. For the first question, what the consultant is providing at the end of this process is basically the lead-in materials for developing a smart scale project, and that is Virginia's mechanism, VDOT, for funding transportation projects. We are not completing a NEPA stage, so we are not approving a final alignment or alternative. The lines that we are showing are generally corridors of where the consultants have designed, actually I wanted to say designed, but assessed for that these are feasible corridors so that we can do the analysis. So it allows us to draw a line and count, say, the number of homes that are being streams are being property owners and environmental easements. So the exact alignment of this project is still to be amended, and it's not finalized. However, it does provide, say, Stafford's, Fredericksburg, or the FAMPO region, a mechanism to say, we are serious about this project. We expect it to go along this quarter. We can now apply for funding to do engineering, so that actually it gets into the curvature and design speeds of the road, how much a for roadway it will require. But the NEPA analysis still requires us to go back and look at these alternatives again, and it's not uncommon that those do change. Design elements may change as well, but you kind of have to say this, we want this facility, we want to put this facility in this general area along this general line on a map. But the exact, say, curvatures like Alice been talking about, or whether or not it follows this hill rise or that hill, if it has to deal with, say, some of the geology of the river crossing, that is still subject to change, but it won't necessarily completely sway through the, well, it could completely sway through the alternatives analysis, but you can't really say for certain it's going to go here at this stage, because there's still a lot of unknowns, particularly from the engineering side, that says the land's unstable here, we have to move it and go back and look at an alternative or a secondary alternative. So it's kind of getting to the selection of this is a project and this is the area. More, I think, to the concern of some of the groups is also determining kind of which road networks that this facility will connect into, because the traffic analysis has said that a bridge is important across all things. It shows a positive benefit. Now it's a question of what point does the bridge or road network tie into? The bridge, the modeling analysis says the bridge really doesn't care too much if it's close to 95 or further away from 95. Well, intersection analysis says, depending on where you kind of slide that and which roads you connect into, will have different impacts in different areas. And that's something that the model, that's kind of what the model and the intersection analysis kind of hopes to show. So that I think it was option D had some very strong intersection and volume capacity, but at the same time had extremely high impacts on property owners living along that. And so that allows them to kind of compare those corridors within the process to say, we think this one's the lowest impact. That could change, but we now know enough that we can proceed to find funding for a project.
Roger that. Thank you.
Okay. The screening analysis, when the consultant was here, asked him a specific question. Do any of these categories hold any more weight than the others? And he said, no, that they did. Okay, so that kind of surprised me because I looked at it a little bit differently. Now, there are a few statements that were made. Also, this was, obviously the presentation slide that was held at the public meeting and available online. Even here, third bullet, besides no build option, option A is the most environmental screening results in the most favorable least impact score range. And then option D has the most environmental screening results in the least favorable highest impact score range. And that is true. However, I taught for 44 years. If I was standing in front of my class and I said, Bobby, you had more A's than everybody. Okay, maybe you had 5, maybe the other people in the class might have 4. Does that mean that Bobby had the highest class average? The answer is no, of course. So what I wound up doing is looking to see how many options had, with most favorable, moderately, or less favorable ratings. All right, and then I graphed. So if you were most favorable, you're in the green. If you were in the moderate, you had the yellow right there. And if you had the least favorable, you were in the orange category. And then again, being a teacher, I said, well, let me attribute a grade to these particular levels. So if you were in the most favorable, I gave you an A, so yeah, a 95. If you were in the moderate favorable, the yellow, I'd say, okay, well, that's maybe a B, that's an 85. And then if if you were in the least favorable, the worst, I'll give you a C and I'll call that a 75. That's the graph that you have in front of you right there, that I put there. What I did then is I totaled everything up. I attributed those point values, a 95, 85, or 75, to the different moderate, most favorable, moderate, or least. And then it was easy to take an average for the entire 14 categories. Okay, not just saying, how many people did the best, but looking at the entire thing. So where this statement is accurate, it says that A has the most environmental and the most favorable, and it says option D has the least favorable. Overall, B1 performed better than any of the other options. So when you are looking at this information and you're using it to make a decision, again, looking at the most favorable for a certain specific amount of categories for an option, as opposed to looking at the entire range of 14 different screened categories, that is more important, I think. And that was not portrayed in the study. Wanted you to understand that. And again,
Tell
here's,
County, they should just hire you in the future because you
Mhm.
have done way more in-depth research that these folks were paid to do and didn't do. And if I was on the board of supervisors, yeah, I'd be wanting some money back.
well, it's just that, again, if none of them held any greater weight than another, then you have to
Yeah,
kind of look at it that way.
Right, exactly.
First of all, I don't agree with that criteria that's on there. If you look at it, public input. First of all, that was a different study or a different survey than the one we just got, but public input doesn't really have anything to do with environmental screening. So why is that even on there? And then there's the city of Fredericksburg is proposing like an easement, or what's it called? I can't read it. They put some kind of, or proposing an overlay. Has that overlay been
We
approved?
have a preservation.
Preservation area.
Overlay.
It's in the comprehensive.
Yeah, but that's basically the same overlay as a conservation easement,
Not necessarily, no.
but it's,
Same thing with the,
so it's very similar, and it's like double dipping in
it's
the screening. But now, if you wanted to put Stafford County Comprehensive Plan in it,
they do not have any resource protection in this area.
yeah, well, they have a river crossing identified in the plan, so why isn't that in the criteria? So there's, different criteria that could be done. And I think the main impacts on the environment are the stream impacts. When you have stream impacts of option A and D that are 5 times more than the impacts of option B, then that's 5 times more of the impact, when some of the other criteria, some of the impacts are very close together where they could be considered even, but instead they're ranked. So the criteria, I don't believe in it. I think the stream impacts should be what dictates the environmental impacts, and the screen impacts of, or the stream impacts of option A is and D are the highest.
So I certainly appreciate this a lot. I still feel like I have a lot to learn in this area, and the way you presented it makes it easier for me to understand and digest different factors. But I would say to start at the beginning and say, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And is it a problem that we're having that we're trying to relieve? Or are we looking at the future growth and trying to prevent, issues that we haven't seen yet? And so I think the different plans talk to different problems. And so how do we prioritize what's the biggest problem now? What's the alligator closest to the boat? Do we go with plan A because it's the alligator closest to the boat? Or do we think, we're gonna get to the D crossing, but it's gonna take another 20 years? And so I wonder did you take any of that into consideration when you were looking at the different possibilities?
When I have looked at everything, I tried to pretty much be all inclusive of any of the information that had been provided. I just simply didn't accept anything that was said one way or the other. I looked at it and wanted to get into the weeds of everything to see exactly the information was showing in greater detail. That's why something like this, I mean, the public is seeing option A as being the best.
One other thing to consider in this is that it's kind of counting the color coding. I would actually
Right.
strongly recommend that even if things are both yellows, one might be better than the other. And
I agree.
within the color codings, they're kind of showing comparisons against each other. So if there's one that's green that is significantly better, it pops up as green. If there's one that's red, it's just saying it's worse than the other options. However, you could actually have multiple greens or multiple yellows or even multiple reds across that. And you have to look at where things are kind of lining up, because in that group of yellows, you could actually have one that's consistently beating another one that's in the analysis that isn't showing. You're going to kind of lose that in the red versus green. I think that's something that the color coding is something that's supposed to draw the eye to and has to the assess, but there's a deeper kind of metric going on with those numbers and figures that you have to consider versus that large analysis and compare them where do these things line up? Because you have, say, option D, you can see that it's lighting up red. But some of the other options lighting up yellow maybe a lot, or some of them's lighting up green and red, but you actually have to stop back and get to it because as Joe's kind of mentioned, some of these do have overlaps. And I'm kind of want to follow up with Brad over his comments of, I think when asked is like, are you weighting those? He's not weighting, he's not applying a number multiplier behind this, but there is probably some assessment from their environmental planner that's looking at, is the stream in this location impacted versus, say, a floodplain along the river, and kind of, it's not going to be pointing at one metric over another one, but looking at it both as in the metrics and as well as comprehensive that says an impact on a class 1 stream and it's following along is going to be different if you're hitting a floodplain along the river and the structures and support over that. So that is actually something that I've kind of noted down to ask Brad a little bit more, just because once you start doing it, their environmental planner and their team has come up with these options. And so you've got to balance it. And you've kind of talked about the environmental, and you have to take the human environment into consideration as well as just the streams, because we have floodplains and other things. Doing aquatic impacts on transportation projects, it does get very detailed and pretty muddy, because that's my other background as a transportation, environmental planners on the aquatic side. And so you really have to kind of do that. So just keep in mind that, one might be both yellow, but one could be twice as much as the other one. It's just in comparison as the group of how they're doing those colors.
If you're gonna do an environmental screening, you would think they would put categories like the amount of impervious area and the amount of land disturbance. So if you have one that's that disturbs 100 acres of land and one that disturbs 20 acres of land, then that's the criteria that should be on there, and it's not.
That's one of the reasons why they do the 250 wide swath, because ultimately we don't know that exactly for certain yet, because that can only come at the engineering further along in the NEPA side. This is still, as you mentioned, this is still at the desktop level. This isn't feel like trudging through people's property, kind of, hey, sorry, we got to do this because we're doing a deep analysis. And so that is They had their environmental planning team kind of do a lot of that. They worked with the jurisdiction staff, so they did look at the environment. They looked at farmland. There's a couple of things that the federal government will trigger. But if it's considered to be in the urbanized area and high risk for development, they're aware that impervious surface is going to be there, but they're also aware that, silver company kind of tomorrow can come in and make it all impervious surface. I shouldn't say pick on the silver company specifically, but yeah, a developer, there's no guarantee other than the Fredericksburg's kind of resource protection that there's going to be a certain level of, constraint on that. So
Sometimes it's better to disturb 100 acres in farmland than it is 20 acres in somebody's front yards.
Yeah, well, that's true,
I
but
wanna ask
that's,
you a question. Now, you've done so much work on this. Just in your opinion, what you've come up with on these changes, in the Cs and the Bs and everything, do you see much cost difference over what they had projected?
I don't have privy to the algorithm or the formula that they use, bridge cost.
Just a
versus
guess.
plant cost.
Think
The only thing I
more or
can do
less.
is, I would think that obviously a bridge cost is substantially more than disturbing the parkway land for the roadway that would be there. I think keeping a shorter bridge will save money if possible.
And that's, the shorter bridge is the one that you proposed, right?
No, I'm right now, as much as I have a preference, I'm trying to just objectively look at the information that was provided. And regarding everything that Dr. Ryan said, I agree as far as the detailed information that we don't see that may impact this somewhat. But this is what not only were we provided with, but it's what's been provided to the public when they are making their choice for a preference. So this is all that, we have to go on at this point in time. So, but I'll get into the cost a little bit later on when I show some of this other stuff.
yeah. We were also told last year that the B corridor had the longest bridge because they named it, quote, Long Bridge. But now we find out that the A corridor has the longest bridge.
Want to move along this. All right, I had asked a question at the meeting, if there were easements that were in the option A region, would that impact the ranking? And I was told absolutely. Here are all the different types of easements that are co-held in a variety of different ways. That you can see south of the river, they end before you get to Quarry Lake. And they end essentially when you wind up getting to the England Run stream at that point too. Now, from meetings that we've had in the past, and discussions I've had, I've found that in order to potentially get around an easement being in place, besides the fact that everyone who's involved in that particular land area would have to be able to modify things. Different ways that can be done for negotiations would be doing things like financial reimbursement, land swaps, et cetera, et cetera. Looking at the screening, it said basically that these were the areas where there was conservation easements. Option C had 36 acres of where that would wind up being down in here. All right, so I looked at it and I said, well, if by any chance there was going to be a land swap, how could that possibly ever happen? And the only way that could happen essentially would be the land that is east of the England Run River. This is I think it is about 80 acres or so forth. But, would it be possible that there was going to be a land swap? That could be.
it doesn't necessarily have to be in the area of the project.
Right,
So
anywhere.
actually, because in this instance, VDOT would be the person doing it, it could be anywhere in the state.
Okay,
So,
okay, even
Yeah.
better.
Well, there's 250 acres of open space land. Half of it's on the golf course, half of it isn't. So it's there that is designated open space by Stafford County law by ordinance. So it can't be changed unless the Board of Supervisors changes it. But there's no benefit to eliminate the open space.
And one of the things that we talked about at the December meeting, I pointed out that for option A in particular, that this essentially would be, have to be the location that it would have to be in. Because of the Bay Act, they have 100-foot buffers, so it would have to be at least 100 feet away from the stream. And then with the deed of easement that was established in 2006, considering that this land here is not under the easement, it's not co-held anywhere. It still says that the river crossing, wherever it would potentially be along the river, is supposed to be as perpendicular as possible up until a 30-degree angle from it. That's one of the reasons that in the option for B that I created that we showed before, that I moved it so that it wound up being perpendicular to the river. So it made it shorter and so forth. But this would have to be where it would be located. Now, using that and using the scales for the map, when I looked at it, this would make it 370 yards away from the I-95 bridge, and it would be 180 feet away from the quarry. And one of the things that came out at the December meeting they had is there was a representative here for the Friends of Rappahannock who pointed out the erosion that is taking place on this side of the quarry, which would be somewhat close, I imagine, to, you know, where that would be located. So I just kind of wanted to point that out. The other points were the concerns, and this is all something you can read later on, but again, with the Friends of the Rappahannock, they do a report card evaluation, grading the different streams that enter into the into the Rappahannock River. And the only one that got all A's and B's was the England Run stream. So I just, you know, wanted to point that out as well. Okay. The other thing that I was providing was that there's no other option, whether it's B1, B2, C, or D, that comes nearly to near the river, near any particular streams or other waterways. Okay. Okay. Operations and traffic analysis, the travel demand bond. Right, this was one of the points that was raised and is part of the rankings that were used in the study, pointing out again that whether it was option one, B1 or B2, they were kind of combined because of the fact that they essentially connect in the same areas, both north and south of the river. But the point is, of course, is that with this particular situation, that there are between option B1, the greatest, and option A, the least, is that the use of the bridge, there's about 1,500 more vehicles per day that would, or during the PM period between 3 and 6 PM that would wind up using that. And that's the evaluative information that we were provided. Wasn't for the full day, it was during that PM peak period. But again, there's 1,500 vehicles, which amounts to an 18% increase in volume if B2 or B1 was used instead of an option like A. So that's pretty important.
Yeah, so that means that many more vehicles are taken off other roads.
Okay. All right, we spent a lot of time on this. Again, the comment, options A and D are the top two options in terms of boosting regional operational efficiency. So again, here we say that those two options are essentially higher rate. All right, and there were 25 different intersections. The level of service ranged from less than 10 seconds if it was a level of service A to F being greater than 80 seconds. Okay, they also provided the information with what I call the bubble maps at all the different intersections to kind of show with colored circles of various sizes what the delays in intersections would be at those particular locations. I went into depth and kind of showed you how I tried to mathematize this. Gave a ranking, level of service A, gave it 1 point all the way on down to level S. Level of service F being 6 points. It changes the way the table is. It allowed me to look to see how many A, B, C, D, E's, and F's there were, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I ended up looking at that countless ways, which are shown very quickly here by the graphs. But what I saw is that essentially they were pretty equal. That whether it was option A, B, C, D, or whatever, they were all relatively similar. And then Dr. Rideout provided us with this information at the December meeting, where it actually showed the number of seconds of delay or compared to the no build option. And again, this is in the year 2050. So we could actually look at the very specific number of seconds of delay for 25 intersections for every single option. The values down here, basically, the number of seconds were totaled. And then compared to the no build option, we wound up seeing exactly what the difference between the no build option was. All right, so I took that, and on your piece of paper, you'll probably be able to see it a lot more. But for example, option D was 193.9 seconds faster, reducing the delays at the intersection. Option A was 168.9. Now, keep in mind that these total values are for 25 different intersections, a total for the 25 intersections. So it was able to take those values, divide them by 25 to see what the actual average of the delay would be for those 25 intersections. And that winds up being the second row that we have here. All right. It also winds up being right here in the bar. So option D, actually, option D was the best, so that it's zeros. And then you can actually look and see the differences in numbers of seconds on average and see how they compare. What it essentially shows is what's down in here on the upper, lower right, excuse me. If you were sitting at the traffic light at these, on average, at these intersections, and you wanted to see how much the delay was, and you wanted to compare the options, that between options C, B2 for option A, you would be able to proceed a half second quicker. Not 10 seconds, not 5 seconds, not 1 second, 1/2 of 1 second quicker. If you were comparing it to D, it would be, or one, A to D is 1 3/4, 1.73 to 1. There's a 3/4 inch difference.
So they're all this, basically the same, and
It would be unrecognizable if you're sitting at there.
But you would actually have to go back and look at each intersection depending on your network to see which ones are doing it. You can get a composite average across a lot, but you'll actually have to go back, they show the circle analysis in law, because I mean, that does. Because you might be getting a big gain in one and then nothing on the other. Another one might have,
There are some where they are slower than the no.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, but this region has 25 intersections that were modeled. You can see that on average, you're ranging, basically, if you eliminate option D, you're talking about 3/4 of 1 second change or a 1/2 second change. So, that's pretty insignificant a change. But you have to remember that the consultant said that options A and D had the greatest levels of change. But they didn't tell you that it was less than 3/4 of a second. So,
But you are having, like, we do have spots, like the orange and red kind of down at the bottom that we extended the intersection analysis a lot broader than in a research area that we would traditionally do for this one. So you do have that weighing into kind of nullifying that you're looking across an average.
but again, that wasn't portrayed to us or to the public when they were getting
No,
a survey. Okay,
Well, the people that are filling out the surveys, and I certainly respect people who have an opinion on the community. But they're the ones that are either sitting in traffic every day hating it, which are from Stafford, right? And so they're the ones that filled out the majority of the survey. And so you're looking at a very specific impact in a very specific area of the entire region. Those people are the ones that spoke up because they hate the traffic that they're in right now.
But were
That
they-
needs to be taken into account, that those are the
Right.
people that are
I agree
talking.
with you, but were they told that, you know, they're told that one option and two options, A and D are better than the other options, but they're not told that the difference in the amount of time is 3/4 of a second that they will never ever notice. Correct.
So to Dr. Rideout's point, which again is something that I hadn't noticed until you stated such. So the last three intersections aren't even in the footprint for the area of the Rappahannock River crossing because they're down in Spotsylvania.
The last 5 on.
Last 5, okay, okay.
So-
So technically, it should have been divided by 25 20 intersections, which then would increase your seconds there. Because again, I would question why are they including those 5 when they're not even in the footprint of the Rappahannock River? crossing?
FAMPO is 3 jurisdictions.
Correct,
Spotsylvania had
correct.
significant concerns that this river crossing was going to divert a lot of traffic, particularly onto Route
Got it.
3. And therefore, we included an analysis to say, is this going to foul up Route 3? Because I would consider, at least from the regional perspective,
Absolutely.
then that might not be a
Good
good
decision.
project. So
Correct.
we
Correct.
did draw a very large kind of circle around this for a quarter.
So that makes sense, but you can understand where I'm saying then it should have been divided by 20, not 25.
Well, regarding the math part of that, if all of these are essentially equal in numbers and they are incredibly close, the averages would still not really change very much because of the fact that comparatively, they would impact everything equally.
But the public, who is not as informed as us, doesn't know that those last 5 intersections, when they look at that chart, are not in the footprint unless they are people who go down into Spotsylvania, live in Spotsylvania, right?
A quarter of our survey respondents were from Spotsylvania, but that was one of the
Right,
things,
that's
like
the
when
thing.
we were developing this, that was in our discussions with the elected officials, that was a major concern, so I think that was.
Oh, I
included in
disagree.
this
I
stuff.
should
Yeah, I know.
understand where you're coming from, why they did it. I'm just
So-
saying that I learned, other than Joe and me, wasn't there somebody, were you one of the board of supervisors? No. All right, but the average citizen.
Yeah.
Like their knowledge, right? They really, they go from point A to point B, they have so much to take care of in their day-to-day lives, right? They just do not. So they're not gonna look at this unless they live in Spotsylvania. Okay, and I know the region really well, and I still didn't realize, oh yeah, it was the last 5, okay? All right, so.
So this is Ian. Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Chairman, may I make a couple of comments?
No, yeah, sure.
So one of the problems with this analysis, and this has happened now twice at your committee, is that when the consultant was actually present in the room, many of the questions which have been asked at the last 2 meetings were never asked of the consultant, right? So you keep on ridiculing the consultant twice now, 2 full meetings worth, when the consultant was out of the room. But when the consultant was in the room, none of these questions were put to the consultant, which I think is rather unfair. Secondly, some of these assumptions are based on sometimes not completely understanding how travel demand modeling works. We had the same problem last time when we had assumptions made on streetlight data. So here again, these particular examples were illustrative. Now you can't use them in some of the ways that they're being used, because if you pick another 10 intersections that also are on the routes that could feed into these various things, you could get slightly different metrics again. So you've got to be very careful what some assumptions you make about some of this data, which is why it's really problematic to have a whole discussion about the consultant's data without the consultant in the room being able to explain what the data actually are. And you can end up making all kinds of assumptions based on citizen research, which actually the travel demand model might dispel if you actually could get all the data out of the travel demand model. For example, when they did origin and destination pairs, those are just illustrative. You can't add them up and come to any total number because they're just illustrative of how the traffic would behave. And if you selected another 10 different origin and destination pairs, you would come to a different conclusion because at those other, on those other routes, the behavior of the traffic will be different. So it's very disingenuous to try to get into the detail of the consultant's presentations after the consultant has left the room without the consultant being able to explain to you how exactly these models work. They're not simple math where you can add up and reach conclusions. Intersections affect each other, and there are some cumulative effects, but it's not 1 + 1 = 2. So for example, these seconds, that is a second per vehicle at each intersection, but then they add up. So at that particular intersection, when you add those seconds up over 1,000 cars, it adds up to a lot of time delay at an intersection. But you can't see that in these slides. You don't realize the full implications of them, and you really need the consultant in the room if you want to blame the consultant's data and ridicule the consultant's data. It really isn't giving you the right answers, and it's not really fair on the consultant who's actually doing all the work. So I'm concerned about this kind of analysis where it's constantly a list of all the sins of the consultant without actually fully understanding how travel demand models work. And that's why we hire experts, because not every one of us in our daily lives are experts on travel demand models and on micro simulation, which is where we are now. The micro simulation then feeds back, it reverses back into the travel demand model and changes the total for traffic. And you really have to have the experts. And what we do at the stakeholder meetings is actually go through that and have the consultants explain to us. And the same thing applies with the environmental screening. We don't just pick, as one member mentioned just now, environmental indicators based on how we feel. It's not about how we feel. We have to satisfy a NEPA process, which is a federally designated process for deciding what the environmental impacts are. It's not about our opinion in our local context. And those NEPA regulations have very specific processes you have to follow, very specific data you have to analyze, very specific answers you have to give, which is why the consultant has a specific environmental expert on this job, analyzing those data and presenting results. And they present that as a cumulative to show us what the results are. So if you want to get into that level of detail on the environmental, the consultant has an environmental expert that understands the NEPA Act, the NEPA processes, how the environmental processes work, and can explain it to us, and we can ask questions, and we can find out how exactly the NEPA Act works in a local situation on a particular project, and how we are to interpret things like the Chesapeake Bay legislation that was referred to differently.
They're excluded from a lot of the stuff. Correct, Ian.
It's very difficult to just pick and choose based on our own lived experience when there are federal and state laws and processes that govern those things. So I just want to have a word of caution that we shouldn't go too far down some of these rabbit holes without actually having people who spent their lives studying and working on these projects given an opportunity to explain their particular scoring system or how they deal with the NEPA process on all of these environmental things, why they picked those particular environmental items to scan what the results of the scan were. And if you don't understand or don't agree with the results, then you can, deal with those questions. That's why we brought the consultant to your December meeting, to answer your questions and to deal with those issues. It's just dangerous to go down particular rabbit holes and do particular math based on what they presented, but after they've left the building. It's unfortunate that this process is being followed over and over again.
Ian, if I may, it is not the intent here to, let's say, go down rabbit holes and so forth. First of all, at the December meeting, the consultant came and made the presentation. And I don't think any of us here on our citizens committee were aware that he was going to leave immediately after the presentation. So we did not have the opportunity to have him present when the other things were going to be made.
The consultants brought in to present his material. It was all open question. You could have asked every single thing. It's another thing to whether or not to ask the consultant to provide feedback on additional materials and studies presented to the CTAC and their members. They do have time constraints. We are billed by the hour for that. They have to deliver a project within their budget and scope. To have, was it 8 presentations at the end of the meeting for the consultant? The consultant's not going to provide feedback on your analysis or get into it. For them, it was, you are hopefully asking questions, getting clarity, providing feedback for them in their analysis. So I would second Ian is that they are contracted to do 6 public meetings. The CTAC was provided 2 of those meetings. One is for BPAC, one is for TAC, and 2 are for the policy, potentially 3 for the policy committee, depending on what levels and needs that the elected officials have. So they have time constraints, and they were here for an hour and a half, which was our designated meeting time.
So Ian, I apologize that I did not make it to the December meeting, and I'm sorry to hear that maybe some folks aren't as aggressive as me, and I would have just jumped in and asked all the questions. So, but with that said, I will say this, I don't think Mr. Watkins' intent is to disparage the consultants. But we do have a right and a duty to ask questions, to do our own analysis, so to speak. And I will say this, I was told by another supervisor when I was in George County that I wasn't a traffic engineer. And at that time, VDOT wasn't interested in roundabouts. But it was interesting that after I fought and argued with VDOT for a year, that the next year on their website, they now stated that roundabouts were the safest. So, so I will say sometimes we may not be the experts. We may not have years of education. We may not necessarily be experts in the field, but we have a duty and we have a right to question the information and the analysis that is.
You absolutely do, and I absolutely agree with you. The problem is that everybody sat quietly when the consultant asked if you have any questions, and then...
And I'm sorry to hear that, I am, and I'm sorry I missed the meeting.
But I didn't sit quietly, and there was a presentation coming afterwards, and I was hoping he could be here to hear it, but he wasn't.
Well, the point is, frankly, that I think only one question was asked of the consultant. And all we've heard since then at these meetings is how everybody doesn't agree with the consultant's data, but you never actually asked him to explain it to anybody in the actual meeting when he was there. And he would have stayed longer if you had another 20 questions. But there were like I think there was 1 or 2 one question or two questions. And then he asked, is there any more questions? Everybody sat quiet and nobody asked him anything.
So I think right now though, Mr. Watkins, just wants to share what information he feels is pertinent and areas that he has questioned.
Sure.
For us to be able to take that into consideration when we are looking at endorsing one of, so, I mean, some of his, data may be faulty, but the faultiness comes into, as you stated, how the information was presented to us in the same manner as presented to the public. So if we, as the most knowledgeable of the citizens, have misinterpreted it, then can we only imagine how much the average citizen has really misinterpreted it?
There's no bad question. No question is a bad question, frankly. So I have no problem with anybody asking the questions, and people should be robust in asking the questions. That's absolutely the point of public engagement, the point of having a citizens committee. I have absolutely no problem with the questions. It's just people didn't actually ask the questions. And unfortunately, it's leading to some conclusions which may not be completely accurate.
Understood.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Rupert.
It's been an hour in this presentation, and I'm under the impression that these are supposed to last 20 minutes. I move that we should move on to the next item on the agenda.
If not for the discussion that involves what's thus causing the presentation to be shortened. The bylaws also talk about discussion about the presentation, which we've interjected from time to time. And I'll continue on. Did the consultant provide any of the things that I had requested of him?
So
There
I have to,
were three different things, three
More
pieces of
specific.
information that he said that he would be able to get back to us.
you'll have to be more specific. on
Okay.
those.
Because the information that was provided.
So this as question on,
For example, regarding the PM periods of time between 3 and 6 PM, that a lot of the data related in the tables was, had requested information for the full day, similar than had been presented at the stakeholders meeting, where he showed option B2 as an example, for the travel over the FAMPO Bridge, et cetera, et
that
cetera.
we're still developing there. But that should be it. It's a question of whether or not that data is at a publishable point.
Okay.
Dissemination, yeah. So that's within their process. So
I will be the first to admit that we are not privy to a lot of the information. We are, as the public is, privy to information and statements that are conjecture that we would normally accept fully. However, in a situation where something like options A and D are the two top options in terms of boosting the regional efficiency on average, that's a nice statement and everything like that, but the data that has been presented to us does not show that.
the data that has been presented has shown both of those statements to be accurate.
By
That's the-
3/4 of a second or a half second.
Well, we've already disputed that a little bit, the last 5 intersections.
Chairman, if Mr. Watkins had asked some questions and they haven't been answered, if we can just get an email, I will liaise with the consultant and get him those answers if they are currently available. We'll make sure he gets them. So if he can just pop us an email, it takes, very quick to just forward that to the consultant, and we'll do the best we can to get him all of those answers.
Okay, very good. Okay. All right, travel times, which obviously is gonna be sitting too well. However, and as Dr. Redout said last time too, these essential points for origins and destinations were just kind of arbitrarily picked, and different locations could have been picked at anywhere else. But when I asked specifically if this information was accurate for these particular points, was told yes, that is the way everything was modeled, and this is the information. for those particular routes, for those particular points. So that was, the travel times was presented to us. However, it was not presented at all at the presentation to the public on November. Okay. Just looking at it as much as I possibly could, based upon the information that was there. I wanted to get an idea of how much of an improvement the travel times were at these different, from these different trips, the 12 different total trips that were there. So I could be able to evaluate what the reduction in time was from these times for option A to the no build, same thing for B1, B2, and so forth. I could see what the reduction in minutes were for those particular times. Then I could calculate again what the percentage of how much quicker these model times for these particular points were. Okay. Then I could do a comparison of the percentages to see what, if any, were the comparisons for the different options for the percentage of reduction in the time trips made. And in 8 of the 12, that was the option that came out first. Very, very close to B1 and C as well, the ones that are also using Celebrate Virginia Parkway. Specifically, these bar graph down here is an indication of exactly how close they were. But again, overall, B2 was just very slightly quicker than those two, but much quicker than options A and D. I also showed at the December meeting that using the one trip, and again, any of these trips could have been potentially been different, but it seemed important to me to figure out maybe from origin 2, which was on Celebrate Virginia Parkway, to destination 1, which is the Mary Washington Hospital, what this data that was presented to us would show. And what it showed is that if you were using option A for this trip, it would take 17.1 minutes. And if you were taking the same trip from that origin to that destination using option B2, it would take 10.2 minutes. And again, I understand that all these different points might show different data, but this is what was available to us to be able to evaluate.
Okay, so
Available to show you that the model is actually operating as a point in comparison, not as a comparison of the options. So it shows that a river crossing is working, but if you pick different points, you'll get different things. And that is what the large model, when you're getting back to a half second, if you look at it completely broad, is going to provide the benefits across the roads. This is them saying, let's pressure test, bring up a couple of examples, because if all of a sudden something is weird or not looking right, then they knew that they had an issue with the model and that we actually pressured this with real trips. But if you change which neighborhood you pick as your point, and depending on where that aligns with the neighborhood, it's not going to be representative. So like we took Celebrate Virginia as an example because it is a large neighborhood within the study area.
Right.
The hospital we know is a major destination. So it does that, but that isn't a comparison between each one of the routes is which one's better, because it's such a very specific thing. It might not be representative of the trips as a whole, because you could have more trips coming out, say, north of 17, for example, going to the hospital. So that's the reason why it's presented, but in the context of where it's presented is important, because it's pressure testing this model with the network with the intersection improvements to show, yeah, the model says we see broad improvement. We brought out examples. They also show broad improvement, but they can't be compared across each other because it wouldn't be representative. Again, this is going from, is the sample representative to the whole? In this case, no. When you're pulling across all 25 intersections, we can say, yes, there is a regional benefit that's functioning at the whole. And the micro analysis kind of supports that. So we know that it's not disagreeing. So again, this is where you apply the methodology within the study, whether or not the results are going to be accurate. So it's a validation and internal validity question.
And if I remember asking the question, and the answer was that the results of the modeling basically showed that the modeling was working properly because there was nothing out of the ordinary that would suspect that the model didn't work right.
Yeah, because we know journals, again, getting back to the regular citizen, they might not know that we shouldn't be comparing these numbers because they're not designed to be comparative between options. But I think as us sitting on the table, planners, politicians, whoever, we know our trip from, say, the Celebrate Virginia area to the hospital. We drove it. I've been driving to the hospital a lot of late. Like, I know the timing of that. And so all of a sudden, you know, if we have a model run and on this analysis, it's saying that, no, now it's going to take me 30 minutes, or no, it's going to take me 3 minutes. I'm like, no, like, unless I'm driving better than ambulance speeds, which, then we know that something's wrong because it gives us something that's physical, that a route we know very well. But I think even in that analysis, like, there are multiple ways to get to the hospital. Like, I might take, I mean, I've been taking Cowan of late, but other times I might take, you know, cut through the University Eagle Village. Like, we do change up our travel times, and that's something that the big model can capture, but this micro test might not capture a whole lot. So, I mean, again, I think it's one of those things that this is a good question for the consultants. This is one of those things where, you know, they have, say, 20 boards, you know, the public has a limit on the information, where they've done a little bit more work. We're still going to get the full analysis for the final thing. But as a presentation, you know, at the public meeting, that might be a hard explanation to talk to somebody at a board. But for us around this room, we have the time to kind of sit down and kind of go through some of this information to be able to explain. In this case, you can't compare across because they're not representative. But I mean, statistician to me, it's like, okay, is that accurate? So I agree, but I'm gonna second. I see Jason, your hand's raised, so I'll yield.
Yeah, thank you. And this was mentioned at a prior meeting, but I'm just trying to remember the answer. I remember Ian mentioning something about this, but this study, is this a model in isolation with all other things being as they are? Or is it they incorporate all other relevant projects that are being proposed at the time? So we're seeing figures that incorporate other roadway improvements, whatnot, that are happening with kind of in and around the area that exists outside of this project. And
So yes, this is
yeah, sorry, that's it.
projects that we've identified and that we can model out through 2050. So this is our future network. If we say what we're planning to build in the future years, we build it. This is adding on top of it. We had a different analysis that went parallel at the request of the policy committee that added the Harrison Road interchange because we were kind of in between models at that time, and that one wasn't in, but now it's in, just timing. So we got a feel of what even that project does, like, so we know kind of the river crossing and a new interchange intersection. So in theory, I think there's, you know, expansions, intersections, or improvements on 17. In this case, like Butler Road is a 4-lane facility leading into the Route 1 intersection there. So, I mean, it assumes that projects that are, you know, still looking for funding or we're pursuing currently right now and things that we might be considering in 15 years are built. So this is a 2050 full build scenario within the model. Then they take that data, feed it into some of their intersection analysis, get better intersection data, and then feed that back into the model. So it's kind of a layered approach.
Okay, yeah, I'm just mentally trying to eliminate variables. So thank you for the clarification.
Dr. Renner, can I ask one question here? Sorry. All right, so for example, if I'm saying that we're going to go from origin to destination to, which was Spotsylvania Town Center, when I look at the information that was provided, O2 to D2 for B1 is 11.8 minutes. Actually, for B1, for B2, it winds up being 11.7, and for C, it's 12.1. Is that information that was modeled numbers that were received?
Yes, that's based off of
because it's the same.
The intersection analysis as well as the travel time of the network. this isn't modeling in the same way as the traffic demand model, because the traffic demand model will say, we have 2,000 people here, they're trying to get to the destination 2,000. The model will actually start generating different trips. They would actually take different routes. This one, they're taking very specific routes and feeding that into their traffic analysis so that they know that there's an improvement at the intersection at this, so it's going to go through faster. There's a degradation in the intersection here, so that's going to go slower. These are the travel times because they did data collection of our roadways in this area. So they know that folks are generally moving at this speed, but if the volume increases, 20%, we expect, we know the times, if volume increases, travel times decrease. And so they're adding that in. So it's kind of a, if this, then that, if this, then that, across multiple things of where they're kind of being knitted together to produce an expected travel time. So,
But they essentially were comparing, I'm sure they didn't modify the trips between the model was run for each set of criteria for each of these. So it's apples to apples to apples.
well, they basically dropped like one person, send them through on their car through this network with the expected speeds, volumes, wait times at the intersections, and said, okay, and what was that? Okay, good. So they took a sample, a very small sample, I mean,
Okay.
dozen trips, and said, okay, is that operating kind of as we expected versus didn't? Because if it was all of a sudden saying, you got it there and, across the river in 37 seconds, let's just assume that. Wait, is that road there coded at 65 miles an hour when it should have been 25?
Okay.
That's kind of what it's doing. Is it allowing for the wrong turning movements because all of a sudden, it might come to an intersection that only allows rights, but they can cut off a huge, or doesn't allow, say, left turns, but the model allows them to make a left turn and therefore they can cut up. They don't have to go around, turn around and take a different route. So that's kind of what this is providing.
But they used the same variables when they ran this particular bit of information. It would have been fruitless to change, a speed limit here from a speed limit there.
Oh yeah, they're using basically the same networks other than the changes in the network and the origins and destinations. So, but it's not necessarily representative for trips as a whole.
But for the model that they ran using that criteria, accurate, there was nothing out of the ordinary.
Yeah, we're looking like if we took a trip from Celebrate Virginia, where we know a route would generate from, if we use Celebrate Virginia as the connection. So they basically turn out of their residence onto Celebrate, cross the river. If all of a sudden a different route that's using a different network, and that trip is faster if they had to go from Route 17 down across on, say, option A and down, if all of a sudden that's route, again, that's getting into the pressure testing, is the model behaving when we throw real trips at it. That's kind of what it's doing. So we expect one, we intentionally almost expect one to be better because we put that dot there because we know it should be better. But if the model starts spitting back things that aren't making sense, then it allows them to go back and kind of rehash or relook to look for errors, because that does happen on some of the models where it would say you can turn left here when you can't, and we have to go back and fix those.
Okay, but as you're saying, the model didn't spit out anything out of the ordinary that you're not surprised by.
Okay, the cell phone data or streetlight data showed that the number one destination going south across the river was Central Park. Number 2 was Town Center. Number 3 was Mary Washington Hospital. Okay, currently at Celebrate Virginia, they get a 911 call almost once a day. With what's proposed there, with thousands more units, they're going to be getting 2 to 4 calls a day. So the time saving factor that was on the chart there showed that under current conditions or no build option, it was a 30-minute drive from Celebrate Virginia to the hospital at current conditions. Okay, and with the river crossings, the B river crossings, it would go from 30 minutes to 10.2 minutes. So we're reducing travel time or ambulance rides to the hospital by almost 20 minutes. Now that's significant, and that can't be overstated.
How does that sorry, I might have been a little foggy. Is that with, compared to no options? No?
Yes.
Okay, but how does that compare? How does that
Information.
compare to the other options?
But it's
That one just
That's-
has the shortest time. The others would still have reduced time,
Right.
30 minutes
Okay.
was not.
yeah, but the other option was like 17 minutes versus 10 minutes.
You're starting needs to look at the, the geographic locations, and this is something more for the public safety involvement at later, because they would be involved in later in the NEPA process once this is getting in. As in, what's their 911 call shed? Like, they, due to like support even across the 95, things kind of get weird where you have Spotsylvania responding to Stafford for the network. Like, they have those things mapped out and in determining their response rates and everything. So you can't just take one neighborhood. You actually have to look at their call response, projected growth and other things before you can really say, okay, which one is definitely better. I don't know how far in the process they've done it. I've seen it done in some places, but I don't know that. But you kind of have to be careful with that, because it might not be Celebrate Virginia, might actually not be their highest call.
I didn't say it was their highest call. I said they're gonna be getting
No,
2 to
they
4
get it,
calls a
but
day.
you can't just pick one is better than the
And I
other.
worked at a senior community at Madonna House, and we were getting 1.1 calls per unit per year. That was in, so when you're talking about 3,000 units, of course, this was a, apartment complex, but if you're talking 3,000 senior units, you're gonna be getting 2 to 4 calls a day.
Question, what he said there minutes ago about the destinations,
Mhm.
who's going to town center and so on, those things. Where did that information come from?
That was the streetlight analysis that was done at the earlier Parkway study that FAMPO did. I think
About a year ago.
Yeah, it was about a
July
little bit ago.
July 2023 report has.
Yeah. And the consultants, I believe, did their own, basically saying they replicated our results for that. I think there was a slight changes. I think all of a sudden, north of the river, maybe Walmart had a bigger peak from a draw, like in, very far east Stafford, but the numbers were remaining consistent. So they were able to replicate that early in the process. I think that will probably be, I don't know if that will be in the draft study. I can ask, but that was something that they verified some of our analysis.
That was probably the existing traffic, not the 2000.
Oh yeah, it was basically pulling from, forget which years now. Sorry, my brain fog is hitting. But yeah, it was like the previous year's worth of data, whereas folks going comparatively as triple.
I think you said it was from 2019.
Could be.
The last thing is, any comparison that is drawn here essentially is a comparison of the percentage change from no build to whatever the other information is. So when I'm saying that 8 of the 12 these are greatest reduction in travel times as a percentage, not in the minutes or anything like that. Because they always originate from different no build times to whatever the model times were. So it's a comparison of percentages, and that's where that was drawn from. The survey results, okay. The original survey, the same was A and B1, B2 have the most community support, and that was reflected in the previous survey, not the one that we were just looking at. But as Dr. Redout said, it's not that dissimilar from, the results that we are getting now. It's interesting that the comments that were shown in the report that you gave line up exactly with the anecdotal data that I received when I spoke to people who lived in Celebrate Virginia. that even though when they saw information about travel times and how much it would shorten their trips, they said, that's great, and that would be nice and everything, but I don't want it to be using Celebrated Virginia Parkway, essentially not in my backyard. So I'm never gonna vote for anything that involves Celebrated Virginia Parkway. The human nature is the respondents will basically vote on how they feel as opposed to not backyard. They're not gonna vote based upon objectively looking at the data as much as what they perceive to be noise and pollution and reduction in value of their homes. That's basically exactly what they wound up saying. So, you know, that's concerning regarding the information that is achieved in the survey. The other thing that's kind of upsetting as far as the survey goes is there are several points in the presented information from the study that shows, you know, gives a statement that will say that option A is this, option B is this, option C is this, and so forth. And even on the final page of the presented information, where the little table was given for the rankings of the different categories that were involved in determining the preference, right there it specifically mentions option A as being, you know, the preferable one for three different categories. Some of that, which I haven't tried to point out, I don't necessarily buy based upon the information that was provided to me or the information that was provided to the public. If you're giving a survey and say, hey, please fill out this survey. Oh, and by the way, we're telling you that option A or option B or C or D are the best choices. The general public doesn't get into the weeds, I think, and therefore they're going to be basing everything that they feel, and if it's supported by what they consider to be accurate information, they're going to vote in that particular manner. So it's telling them on the page that basically ranks the preferences. What?
Where in the survey did we say that they were like,
No, but
in the presentation materials, they're lining things up, but
the
it
presentation
was not in the survey materials.
And also, the link that to the survey is directly related to the
presentation material.
presented at the presentation. So if they're gonna look to try to get further information, they would look at the presentation.
Yeah, correct. Like, we're providing the information that was presented to them if they wanted more information in the survey.
Hopefully they tried to base their decision on
Well, yeah.
what's presented to them. Okay.
Um,
Other things that we
Can
really
I-
quickly. Yes, sure.
Sorry, this is Ian. I think there's a misunderstanding there. The consultant was asked to make a recommendation of an alternative to the policy committee. So they were instructed to narrow the recommendations initially from the 5 down to 2, and then put that out for public comment, and then come back to the policy committee after the public comment and narrow the 2 down to 1. So it's a misunderstanding of their task requirement. They were meant to give their opinion, but not for a final solution, but to say which 2 were the better options out of the 5, and that's what they did. So it's not a biasing of the survey. They were meant to do that before the survey so that the public could decide whether they agreed with them or not, and then give comment on the survey. And frankly, the public didn't agree with one of their options and chose option B instead of one of their options. The consultant recommended option A and option C, if I recall. And the public survey showed that there's no public support for option C. And so the public did exactly what I think they were meant to do, which is to say, yes or no, we agree with the consultant or not. And they agreed with the consultant on the one option, and they disagreed with the consultant on the other option, and recommended, basically, if you look at the survey, for one of the B options. So the public, I think, did exactly what they were asked, and I think the consultant also did exactly what they were asked, which is to provide the 5 and then to recommend 2 and then to ask the public, do you agree with that? And what do you think? And which option do you prefer? And then the public cast their votes, and they've basically rejected one of the options that the consultant recommended.
Again, things that we discussed in the December meeting was there had been discussion, brief discussion regarding what would happen to Sanford Drive and option A. And because it had always had a grade separated overpass similar to the one that you see up there. But the discussion centered around causing Sanford Drive to be dead-ended, to not be a straight path through to go to Route 17, that essentially you would have to go south or north on option A to be able to get back into that particular area. The current region has said, again, the current option A would have an overpass that is down in a gully. I talked about having some sightlines that were diminished, as opposed to the option that was moved would wind up then be placed on an upper elevation on a hill, where again, there would be no sightlines that would be
At grade.
I'm gonna say that these are design considerations and we are nowhere near this level of details that we can provide as far as at this point in the study. The comment that was made was with a meeting where FAMPO staff went to the Friends of the Rappahannock to show their board kind of where we were in the process. One of their members made a comment questioning the overpass because it was a assumption that was made at a very early point in time as a kind of a requirement of DDOT within this study to consider it, and they provided an alternative. We provided that is actually a very interesting comment because nobody's kind of questioned this design element. We are memorializing that comment so that at a future stage, when we're getting into the designs and figuring out how whichever option is advanced is integrated and the engineering takes place, that we're going to make sure that that comment comes back, because we were kind of like, Ian and I were, and then we're like, initially we were like, no, that won't, like, and then we're kind of like thinking about it again. They weren't traffic engineers, but they actually pointed out a very clear assumption that was just not questioned through the whole process, of that we want to say, you know what, that probably has a bit more weight and we need to revisit that, but that's not going, like, right now it's an overpass, but we're like, but we don't want that to become just a blind assumption for anything that moves forward. And we were memorializing that wasn't a design consideration as far as the study on the impacts or the traffic analysis. We're just saying, when you get to that process and design, let's revisit that and memorialize that comment because it was a good one. That's one of those things that you walk out to the community getting back. It's like, you don't have to be a traffic engineer to kind of point out that the traffic engineers sort of made an assumption and maybe we need to go back and revisit that. And so like Ian and I were basically trying to memorialize that idea in the discussions. We used it as an example of, hey, this is something we haven't thought about. We're recording this as part of the public comment. And so just be aware of that this isn't going to come out of left field, but the consultants doing any work and the like line of sight that is way further than the design process.
It doesn't matter whether we pick any one of these 5 options or another option. We're going to run into design problems with any one of them, and it's going to be a lot of design problems. So, like you said, there's no sense in us really digging into these. We're wasting our time from the big picture.
This is
And
again,
that's big picture.
people who aren't
Is
here.
picking one of those options, and Spotsylvania County is still not in on any one of these 5.
Okay.
And
Well, if we can just add to the memorialization that putting it in a gully by a stream as opposed to placing it on this hill would potentially be something that I think would make it much more efficient. Especially when a trip from point A to point B currently takes 0.8 of a mile. And if it was dead-ended and had option A, that 0.8 of a mile trip would now take 2.3 miles. It's kind of eliminating a grid, which is something that I kind of always assumed that we were certainly opposed to. We wanted to create a better grid. And the last thing I had on here was we had the lot, or the parcel known as 44W5E, which is where the end of Commerce Parkway is. This is Celebrate Virginia Parkway. This has been fully cleared, with stormwater basins, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So at some point in time, should this be developed, what is the impact that it has on the need that seemed to have been established for having the Commerce extension, and what would potentially be alternatives? That's all. Regarding that.
Traffic, I was sitting in storage units, so. What we need.
Thank you, Al. And,
There's one more page, but I know Rufus is mad as hell at me already, so I don't know. Did go any further?
You should get mad as hell.
well, listen, I appreciate, you getting in the weeds on it, because, I don't know many people that would. And, I know it takes a lot of time, and I'm sure you probably have as many hours on your timesheet as Michael Baker.
I hope not.
Now, after seeing all this,
I didn't cost, what, $680,000?
Yeah, we're reaching the end of our budget. They're now at the delivery stage, so.
I did make one misstatement there when I said we're not interested in any of those options. We are interested in that dash line you had across there.
Yeah.
Citizen D, we're gonna call it.
What was that?
Citizen D.
Citizen D?
That's his D.
Yeah.
D,
Well,
that
I don't
connection
think it was.
celebrate.
It wasn't a D, was it?
Well,
But anyway,
yes.
connecting with one of those lines to come into Single Oak Road on Route 3, with a Y crossing the.
D-2.
We've got 2.5 miles of roadway through open land without touching a single house. And in fact, Spotsylvania County already owns over half of that land. But would not have to be purchased.
That's why Spotsylvania's remained in the process,
Well,
because right now
They're supposed to be coming back to y'all with something on that.
we're waiting, but yeah.
You're waiting, okay.
We're listening, we're waiting, listening,
I keep
that's why we
waiting.
keep Spotsylvania in the room, because. Yeah.
Something to it.
All right, before we move forward, John, please, give us the schedule on when we get to say something to the policy committee.
Well, you can go ahead and state whichever you wish to the policy committee. If you want to endorse an option, if you don't want to not endorse any options, if you want,
Or
whichever
just simply
statement
pick
you
an
are.
option you
Yeah.
don't want.
You can do that. That being said, the consultants are basically looking to move forward with a preferred alternative so that they can complete their contract and provide smart skill level analysis and not true design, but give a better and some very light design qualify us after the state's funding for this, or at least build up a chunk of that application, because they're pretty intensive.
How soon
So-
do we have to have that?
It's gonna take them 2 to 3 months, and if they want to close out this project, they can. So as soon as the policy committee gives them direction, they're going.
So my question is, do we literally have to pick from what is here? Or, for example, none of us like D as it's currently outlined here, but as he said, he's like, well, but what we like this is Citizen D that Al came up with. Could we hypothetically say we endorse Citizen D and send that? And I'm asking you because otherwise, kind of a moot point, because like he said, Are you gonna endorse D if that's how you have to endorse it?
No.
Right, exactly.
It
Exactly.
destroyed 63 houses. Hell no.
I think, so to the question,
Yes.
could you endorse it? Absolutely. The challenge to that would be that this has been following a PEL, planning environmental linkages.
Mhm.
And traditionally, you would also have to do the same level of analysis as the previous
So you
option.
basically need to stick with it.
So that's not saying it can't deviate some, but you really got to kind of keep it in the general kind of quartering guideline. So in that case, if you're looking at it, you would actually probably, I must say this, personal opinion, at that point in time, you would endorse C. Because, and then ask them to extend it further down because you're keeping the same quarter connections and then you're just modifying and shifting, and therefore it's still taking the exact same thing. And we also have that area studied even with D. If you propose something completely new, then whatever option we have moving forward, we don't have that and it won't be available for the smart scale. So it would be kind of a, I don't want to say a lame duck option, but it would be close to that.
Chairman, if I can offer a suggestion, the committee must do whatever it wishes. It can either not endorse an option or pick one of the options or whatever. Really, it's up to the committee. I mean, it's perfectly fine for you to say we want to support a modified option X. So if you say, I want to support a modified option B, or I want to support a modified option A, or a modified option D, that's perfectly fine. There's nothing profoundly wrong with that. So if I think somebody was mentioning a different version of option D, then that's perfectly fine to say that to the policy committee. It's up to you. You can say whatever you wish. And if you feel that as a result of having seen the study and looked at the materials, you feel that the best option for the region is to take one of the options and modify it in the following way, that's perfectly fine.
So my question is, unless we want to stay here all night, would it make more sense for each of us individually to email him in ranking order what our options are? Are we gonna?
I would strongly prefer this, that it's done in the
Today?
public sphere
Okay.
at a meeting, and I would
All right.
recommend it sooner than later.
Clinton,
I mean-
so had a motion in the chat to, take a vote on a recommendation to not endorse any option is laid out, and to review alternative options.
Ms. Clinton,
Yes.
I don't know if they can make a motion from,
Actually, they can, they just don't count towards quorum, so they are actively a participant. Clinton, can you actually read that out loud for us? So it's not just in the comment section?
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
gonna say, we
you
haven't
make a
even
motion,
discussed.
have a if there's a second, then you can have the discussion.
Okay, sorry,
So,
I was out of.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah. This is Clint Wells. I move that the meeting or the members take a vote on whether or not to endorse any option as currently laid out and to recommend review of alternative options.
Tamara seconds online in the chat.
Tamara seconds it.
I don't
I'll do that.
understand the
So-
motion there. You've got two different things that.
he's making a motion that we don't recommend any of the 5 options and that we consider alternatives. Basically say we don't like what's on the menu.
Meaning alternatives, define alternatives.
Good
Are you
question.
referring to Al's alternatives or are you defining scratch everything and go back to square one, which the Board of Supervisors will never agree to?
So right now, there's no other alternatives on the table. Al's, what he's laid out today is not an active alternative. So it would be up to them as to what other alternatives they choose to consider. And then we would take a vote on that as is our duty accordingly. But right now, all I'm looking to do is put a pin in this discussion because it doesn't seem like anybody's really happy with any of the recommended routes that the consultant is looking at. So it seems like it's a done deal for us that nobody here really wants to support any of these, or at least that maybe individually we do, but as a group, doesn't seem like we're going to come to a consensus over.
Yeah, the Board of Supervisors is not gonna, agree to start all over and spend money again, so we have to pick with, best of our ability with the information that we have, what we feel is the most viable recommendation.
John, if we
With
start all
motion
over
still on the
again
table.
with another alternative, doesn't it have to go with a full study?
Yeah.
And then have to go before the full, with all of the meetings and everything?
We're 2 years in the process.
Follow the
It's not gonna happen.
same process, yeah.
It's different to have a modified version.
So, well, even with the modified,
Oh.
we would have to still go for.
I mean, we're still in the NEPA process, and at least for the advantages of this study is that we can actually pull a lot of the analysis forward. That's part of the planning environmental linkages. If you say we want something that's not any of these and it's not in the general spirit of any of these, like
Yeah.
we can shift, like the lines on the page aren't the alignments. They are the quarters that we've studied to say, this area is better than that area, so, and which roads is connecting into.
Yeah.
But so there is shifts, so it's not alignment. But if you're gonna say, I want option E, something that's not considered, then it's a full redo
You
again.
can't shift it a quarter mile down the river or something.
Now,
Yeah.
that would become a new option.
Yeah, one of the things that I would ask that we consider is we could wind up saying, policy committee, that option D as it currently stands, which utilizes Green Bank Road, et cetera, is not something that we would consider at all in any kind of favor. However, if certain changes to it were made, like using Celebrated Virginia Parkway, and then going down south, and keep in mind that it wouldn't be that terrible to actually have that kind of a D that uses Celebrate to come down, thinking ahead that there could be modifications made to that D,
I
that then separates and goes
I would
directly south.
strongly advise in that that's option C.
I
So
agree with him. I agree with him.
That is option C. The
Okay.
question of where it crosses the river to a lesser, is less material. We're actually not worried about the actual, well, we are worried about where the bridge crosses because where it is, there's environmental concerns and other things.
Mhm.
But you can shift option, you can move C, like you're not crossing another alternative at that point. You're not changing which roads it
But
connects.
you're not gonna move it all the way down to from C to where D is currently
Yeah.
located.
Actually, you could, yeah,
You could easily drop.
because
it
it's
down.
hitting the same amounts of environmental easements, it'll change the cost.
I think they're planning a data center there. So I
But
don't
at
see.
that point in time, that's what I've been saying, like option C and
Using
D.
C because it uses Celebrated Virginia Park.
Yeah.
That's essentially what you're saying.
And the reason why C is shorter was for cost, because the more roads you go down, it would actually,
Still do the same thing, which is drop C down here, okay, and then still have your daughter. I liked your idea of actually having two, because then people can come this way or this way versus everybody.
I
having to go
don't-
one way.
Actually-
Where that divide.
what did you say, two?
So, you know, on his option, he had it coming in, but also coming
Oh, the
down,
dot,
right?
dot.
And so
here.
that's what I said. Makes sense because then people can choose to either go here or go here rather than funneling everybody one way.
Yeah, but we're talking about
How
changing.
we connect in, there's some development. How it connects in, we are still waiting for that, but if you
Right.
wanna say that this is your preferred corridor to use Celebrate Virginia,
Yeah,
sling it down the peninsula there,
right.
then I would say that falls in line in the spurs and assessment of
Mhm.
option C, because sliding the road along, that could be a design, that could be a geology question later.
Right.
But if you're gonna do that, I would not, if you're gonna say is to use Celebrate Virginia, do not recommend option D.
Well, if you think it's not gonna be having the. Yes.
Yes.
I don't-
Different.
In fact, single load is right here. We came right down, just like that, it's about 2.5 miles across here. And the bridge would line up, come right across there. Yeah.
Okay, can I say something?
Go ahead.
I'm all for connectivity, but we have a problem here. We have a local road proposed. And now you want to create a bypass for Route 3 and connect to it. So what the problem's gonna be is that Route 3 traffic is gonna hit that too, and it's gonna turn from a local road to a bypass, and we're gonna be overloaded. Celebrate Virginia Parkway isn't gonna handle it. Centerport interchange would have to be redone, and Centerport would have to be,
That isn't on the table. I think the comment is for, at least with the C and do it, it would potentially permit another jurisdiction if they want to connect into it a little bit easier to the network. However they choose to connect it. If a jurisdiction wants to, who's currently been opposed to the project, wants to rejoin and say, hey, do it, this gets it closer to their jurisdiction where it could be, because you're looking at that general facility as far as connection. That would be like part of the alternatives analysis in a future need process. I'm going to say, just because there's a motion on the table not to endorse anything, and that we look at other options, there is a second to that motion, and we've had a discussion.
So
I'm
we
just
have,
saying,
we have a motion to endorse nothing,
Second,
and it's been seconded,
Yeah.
and we've discussed it. Let's vote on that.
I'm gonna make a substitute motion.
We have a substitute motion.
To endorse both B2 and A. Would be the motion,
Is there
substitute.
second.
no second? Anyone else want a substitute motion? Let's go back to the original motion.
Lita, I'm sorry. Hold on, I want to have a roll call just so that everybody's clear, and she can read everybody online as we,
So it's everyone.
and everybody in the room.
Just
and-
ask one more question. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
sure.
Before we decide whether or not we're gonna endorse anything, I don't feel like at least I don't have, I think I've had a chance to say what my views are. To me, again, I still wanna know which problem is the most important to solve, because to me, A looks like it's supplementing, very close to 95. And in my mind, there's a certain instinct that says to me, divert the furthest away from the congestion. I understand supplementing that road would also alleviate congestion, but I would like opinions on whether or not we want to supplement, that local traffic, or whether or not we want to divert it as far away from where the congestion is. Sometimes when you build the road out, you're creating opportunities away from that congestion for more development. What is our goal? Is our primary goal to relieve that traffic right now? Or is it to try to create a bypass? I think a bypass around Fredericksburg might not be a bad idea.
So the scope and purpose of this project, if I may,
Go ahead.
is that this is designed to be a connection for local residents making local trips to high destination, origin and destinations. We looked at the map. If we connect the 2 points, they're like number 1 and number 2 or number 3, both directions. And currently those trips are being required to either use the interstate. So it's the local roads that you basically have to get on an interstate basically within a mile to make that, which there is a accessibility issue at that point in time if you're not able to make it on the interstate. Or there's actually a very large number of trips that are avoiding the interstate and the reliability issues with it that are going down to Route 1 and then cutting back across the city, either on, Fall Hill, Washington Boulevard, Route 3, Cowan. And that when they did the traffic analysis, there are significant benefits to particularly those roads, the non-interstate roads, although it does pull some of the traffic off the interstate because you do have users who are using the interstate for those trips, so that all of a sudden people are driving down, for example, Route 17 to Route 1 across the bridge through kind of past the hospital or cutting through the hospital area, which is adding traffic around there, down to say Cowan to get back over into Central Park or vice versa. You're having a very inefficient trip through very congested interstates.
That helps me a
And
lot,
that,
because I like the idea of a bypass, but if
Mhm.
that's not the primary goal here, then I wouldn't consider those as my top choice. So understanding that better, I would probably not endorse D or C. Because if you're saying that we're trying to create better transportations towards those trips that everybody's talking about, you're going into those congested areas.
you're seeing that all these options are actually, as Al was kind of saying, they are actually all performing very well. Like it's, the model says if you build a bridge here, the network likes it, congestion does go down. It doesn't provide a new impact on Route 3, particularly in Spotsylvania. It's kind of neutral to that. In previous studies, we did actually look and say how far you kind of pull it. It's still within this area because, and so where we direct it to where we could stop. But is there more the further you get from 95? You get some. It's not a lot. Like you're not completely redirecting all the trips from, say, Fauquier or Culpeper around. Like we're not redistributing any of those trips. You're getting a little bit of a pull. The closer that you make it to 95, you're keeping all the same local trips. You're getting a little bit less like regional trips or alternative trips. But generally speaking, those aren't the trips that are being served. As in, basically, we're servicing the same populations regardless of where the bridge is kind of irrelevant. However, it's very relevant as far as where the roads that are feeding into that bridge, as in where the burdens, either environmentally, human impact of who has to kind of absorb the impact of having a new connection, because we see a drop, because there's a very real thing that if you put a bridge at the end of Celebrate Virginia, you're going to create, you know, many more trips along that. But at the same point in time, if you don't want to use Celebrate Virginia, if you use Green Bank, it's a huge impact to property owners and a lot of housing that's along it, and you're still doing option A, you're impacting a different neighborhood, directing.
A lot, because
Yeah.
right now, option A is gonna create a dead end here at Sanford and everybody.
That's not, no.
It's most likely would not happen. That's just.
But also, sometimes
But you would have to build a brand new road if you don't use the existing road. Option A is basically we build a brand new road through an area that doesn't currently have. And it is, in this case, it's borderline on the Sanford Road kind of community. It's kind of a weird, I would say, it's unique in that it's that close to kind of our core urbanized area, but it's also agricultural to a lesser extent, as well as it's currently zoned industrial or like high development process.
Development follows that road.
Yeah.
The trips change, right? You know, you
Yes.
look at the bridge in King George and, you know, people can either go, they might have been hesitant to go to Leda to Target, but now that there's a double span of the bridge, it's, you know, just there to Fredericksburg is now a decision that they're
We
gonna
do
make.
see a redistribution.
Further out.
If you do a road further out, you're still having,
Central Park anymore.
you would, so I can't give you the exact, like we've done the model runs of putting the river crossing 5 miles west. However, the population base is still kind of within this area.
There's a sweet
And they
spot.
would have to drive out 17, which is already congested,
Right.
cross, and then cross back on Route
There's
3.
there's a point where a diminishing returns. It'd be easier to go back to 95,
Yeah.
come back down.
The biggest neighborhood is actually those who live on Celebrate
Yes.
Virginia Park. And there's over 1,100 homes currently. There's 100 new units being built. And of course, in the villas at Celebrate Virginia, there's anticipated 580 additional ones. As far as what's going to get used the most, the traffic demand model does show which particular option was going to
B2.
be more.
But again, you do have differences in where those trips are being redistributed. In that case, you might actually have more folks from, say, Celebrate Virginia using the target in Fredericks, because the model.
Okay, John, if I could just,
I agree.
John, if
All
I
right.
could just interrupt, Chairman, you had first a motion on the floor in a second, and then you had a substitute motion by, I think, Mr. Burrito. And in terms of Robert's rules, I think, can we just check that there is a second or not a second for Mr. Burrito's substitute motion to see whether it's still on the floor?
There was not.
No second on that one. So
Nobody
we're back
said-
to the first one.
Okay, just want to keep you on track with the rules of meetings.
So you want to go ahead and vote on the first motion, which was,
No.
Can we get a roll call? Sorry, that, I was about to say that, but we got into that.
Okay, the roll call vote.
Yeah, because, yes.
For online and in person, and voting to not endorse any of the options, is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Is that the full motion?
No, it's not. It was not to endorse anything and to seek new alternatives.
And to not endorse any option as laid out and to review alternative options.
I can't support that.
Timothy Welsh,
no,
Tamara Banks. Said no. Wait, no, sorry, Tamara. You're voting against not endorsing or?
Well, maybe.
Because the motion is to not endorse. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
This is Clint. Basically, the motion is that we don't actually have a consensus of what we would recommend to the other committees that are actually going to vote on this. I want to remind everybody that it's not our job to vote on whether or not this happens. It's our job to advise on what the public might think, which they're also doing through other measures as well. I'm happy to remove my my motion if somebody else has one that they want to put forward, where we can actually put this to bed. I'm just trying to move forward because we've spent a lot of hours over the last several months going around the drain on this, and we haven't actually gotten anywhere.
So I'm happy to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to put forward option C with possible modifications to be considered.
Okay, in
Okay.
terms of the rules, you can't do what you're doing. You need to either ask the person who submitted the motion to withdraw the motion, or you need to have a substitute motion.
Yeah, he did, yeah. Got it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Ian, I'll withdraw my motion and.
Okay, great. Then if there's a new motion, let's hear the new motion.
I move to endorse option C with possible modifications to be considered.
is there a second?
Second,
Who was that? Sorry, can you,
Jason.
Jason?
Any discussion on this one?
C,
I think we need to determine what we would want.
I don't think position at this point. I think it's too early.
But unfortunately, the information is going to be provided to the policy committee. That's the certain fact. That probably February, but endorsing preference. So that the consultant.
Right, and the consultant. Yeah.
So
So-
I will say this, Board of Supervisors expects you to provide feedback. That is an expectation. That's why you're here. That's why this committee is formed. And if you simply provide nothing, then why?
I concur. I think we do need.
Well, I
as a
can be more
committee-
specific. You know, I think that the people who want this bridge are a bunch of sorry whiners.
I understand your position that you don't want to build, and I respect that 100%. But unfortunately, position to pick an option.
And one of those options is no build. Support the no build option. The people that chose to live at an inconvenient spot to the mall and an inconvenient spot to the hospital now want the taxpayers to bail them out by building a bridge. Heck no.
I want to point out that the Silver Company made an agreement with the Department of Historic Resources on a no-build zone, basically, in areas of option C and D because of the historic resources on the property. So I think, and those two options have,
Okay, but those, do we know the specific locations of where those historic locations are? Because certainly that could be moved around. And
So with
if
that,
we are lowering,
send over that deed.
if we are sending the crossing of further south, you're talking about basically using golf course land. So those historical locations are probably scattered somewhere there.
but the whole property, basically, it's 23 historic sites have been identified.
They will not be allowed to build on them, so.
Yeah.
Joe, you want A, but you want to keep the waterfall clean, right?
Yeah,
Which one?
I think option B2 is my preferred option for many reasons. Number one, it has the least amount of impervious area. It's the shortest option. It has the least amount of clearing and impacts to the physical environment. If it was moved slightly to the south, where it was originally supposed to be, it would have a lot less impact on the conservation easements and other impacts. The bridge could be a little bit shorter too. It has almost the least amount of impact to streams. It doesn't impact the waterfall at all. It was the least costly option, but I just don't agree with the new cost estimates.
Motion for C, do it for C. Do we have a second for that one?
Can we have a motion?
Second, Jason.
Oh, Jason, yes. All right.
Can we have a motion for B?
Oh, well, you already had it, so.
That would be a substitute motion, and I think we probably.
Is that a substitute or would that be a substitute motion or, all right, normal motion?
Yeah.
You have a
You can
motion
make
on
a
the,
substitute motion for B.
you have a motion on the floor currently that's been seconded and you started having discussion about it. Do you want to proceed to vote or is there a new motion?
We need to
It's
vote.
the
We
second.
should vote on C, all right?
So
Vote on Ruby's
can we have a
motion.
roll call, please?
Are we still having discussion now?
No.
Why not?
Your substitute motion? No, Bill?
I was seconding his substitute.
No.
motion.
No,
he
no.
withdrew his second.
He withdrew.
But no, I didn't withdraw my
Okay.
motion. I just didn't get it.
I don't know.
That was C with,
Yes.
with a,
Possible
Modification
consideration
of
for
the alignment.
modifications, yes.
The actual alignment, yes.
The only discussion I was going to mention
Substitute
is
motion.
okay,
the B that was actually shown on this particular slide is essentially what Joe was talking about,
Yes.
which meets, it doesn't take care of sending anything further down that would assist the Spotsylvania. But as far as everything else, it seems viable. So,
I think they were asking for two options, so I'm gonna go ahead and,
Well, they're asking us to narrow it down.
Yeah.
The consultants have basically said through their analysis thus far that the two best options in their opinion that they're asking for feedback were between option A and option C. They did have their reasons for picking between those two, but note that that will have its own ramifications.
but the public
Look, I don't-
survey says option A and B.
It actually, at this point in time, between the options A and C, it said A.
Correct. And I don't disagree with your comments or your presentation that B2 is, in my opinion, the best option. As someone that lives there, deals with all of this, is gonna be impacted by this for the rest of my life, because I'm probably gonna live there the rest of my life. I agree. But I'm also looking at it from the standpoint of, we're not going to get a consensus tonight. This is where you have to work together. That's why we're regional. And the only way to get Spotsylvania on board is to have C with modifications.
Okay, well then let's add B2 to it and forward 2 options to the consultant. So I'm going to make a motion, a substitute motion for option C with the possible modifications and B2.
Or how about B with modifications?
You're kind of like, I would strongly advise to pick an option you can forward to, but if it's muddled, I would say you would potentially wait it, because at that point in time, if you can't pick between B and C,
Yeah.
the community has said A. And you would get into that
I
consideration.
don't necessarily agree with that. If you looked at that survey.
Supervisors are asking us to pick one.
So if we were to say, just based on the fact that the least amount of roads that would have to be rebuilt would take out option A and D, that we would forward consideration for B1, B2, and C, that would give the rationale behind why we would cut A and D out and say that we think the middle of the road, least amount of disturbance to the,
That is one of the reason why option C was picked over option B is that C generally has less disturbance. Again, that is the core of the river. That's the core of the floodplain. That little peninsula flat area that's sticking out is very low level. The city has a very specific large chunk of easement as well as its resource protection area right through the center of it. You're kind of going through a huge ecological core.
but am I wrong to say that the most of this group would be able to endorse either one of the B or C option?
John, I think if we can just stay out of the conversation now, as staff, we're just here to support you. You can pick whatever you want.
I was just,
Can I go back? I know it's several months ago, but isn't A about $50 million more than the cost of these other options?
Mhm.
It was, and then they changed it.
No.
well, it is
still
most costly.
It is the highest cost.
D is the cheapest. D, B2, and B1 are kind of in the middle, but on the higher level of the middle.
C will become more expensive. South we make it.
Right.
But as A gets developed, what's going to happen is even if we did pick A, there's going to be developers in there that are going to want to build on their property. And until the funding is there to buy their property, there isn't anything we can do about it. So I think A would end up getting built out before the funding is available. So that's.
That A is their top choice. So we can scratch that off. Is there anybody,
D also.
is there anybody who D is their top choice?
D as illustrated on this map, sucks.
Okay,
Yes.
so now we can say we've narrowed it down, we're making some progress.
Right.
What are some of the attributes, for me, I'm looking at the Bs and the Cs and seeing less money because it's shorter.
Yeah, I don't think anybody likes B1.
So
eliminate that.
does anybody think B1 is the very best on the list? No, so we're down to the best on the list is either B2 or C. Are we happy with giving that endorsement?
No,
Or
they
would
want
we like
one.
to narrow it down even more?
They want one.
We're working on.
I think we were instructed to pick 2, weren't we?
No,
Reduce it.
the options have basically been reduced to 2 right now.
Okay.
Now, here's a bad question.
Mm-mm.
Regarding, since Spotsylvania essentially quote unquote is out of it at this point in time, is it necessary to pull them back in to get the bridge built? Since it's essentially going from Stafford to Fredericksburg.
So where Spotsylvania would have, inclusion would be at FAMPO, but otherwise, any of these options does not require the Spotsylvania Board of Supervisors to approve the projects, but they are a member of FAMPO and therefore their member representatives would provide at the FAMPO level.
And have the opportunity to vote.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I figured.
And if they would like to be included in this, if the region ever wants to see an RTA. I'll just put that in
Blackmail.
Yeah, like I said, I'm trying to reach compromise here.
Because approximately 60% of all the money that would come into an RTA is gonna come from Spotsylvania County.
Yeah.
Not the city of Fredericksburg or
I
staff.
don't think it would be that, it wouldn't be that much.
They are the biggest sales tax revenue generator.
That's right.
If that's the RTA's tax source.
Can I make a comment or argument relating to the survey results that we learned? Right. Looking at them as they were ranked. All right, we saw that as far as number one ranking was option A. But when I look at this, I still look at this as A is the eastern option, and it's kind of called that. And then anything that uses Celebrate Virginia Parkway, I almost group together as something that's west. And if B1, B2, and C are using Celebrate Virginia Parkway, when I look at the survey, I look at the combined numbers of B1, B2, and C. Look at that as, and then compare that, the rankings for A in the survey. And I
But you get 3 votes for one and one only gets 1 vote.
Right,
You
according to
can't,
using
yeah,
the main artery though.
yeah.
And everybody, all those people were okay with using that as the main artery is his point.
They look at it and say, this is west.
I would be hesitant to say that
Split.
result of the survey.
Let's just go around it. Let's just go around the table and just say which one you're in favor of, B2 or C. Joe.
B2, followed by B1 and C.
No.
Which one?
That's my ranking. The only reason why I made a motion for A was because the public said A ranked high on the public opinion. That's why I wanted both A and B2 next to each other so they can be compared. And I think that would solve the issue, which one's better.
Al.
I'm gonna say C, because I want Spotsylvania involved.
Bob.
That's the only way it seems to happen.
Rupert.
Isn't this process out of order?
No, I'm just taking a litmus test here.
No build.
Okay.
B2,
B2,
B2.
right. Denise.
I'm torn, but I would.
I'm torn also.
C.
See,
See, online, Jason and, Clinton,
C.
not sure, I think that was Jason.
what motions?
That was Jason.
Yeah, that was me.
Clinton asked if we finished the vote and Tamara abstains.
We're voting on a motion of C, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
And Tamara abstains.
All right, keep going down the list.
So we're voting now, okay.
Voting
Great.
with C with modifications.
I don't think this is in terms of Robert's Rules of Order, this is not a vote. You were just going and.
No.
Oh, no. There's a
We're
motion
back-
and there's
we're
a
back to
second
the
on the
vote.
table. They're ending their discussion. Tim did a straw poll and they're continuing with the vote. We're doing a roll call vote.
All right. This is voting to endorse option C with modifications. Correct. Timothy Welch,
Yes.
Tamara Banks, I think still abstains. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay, Jason Broughton.
I, yes,
Yes, okay.
yes, sorry.
Ruby Bravo,
Yes.
Joe Brito,
No.
Rupert Farley,
No.
Denise Flatley,
Yes.
Robert Fogg,
Yes.
Glenn Goldsmith,
No.
Larry Gross,
No.
Rebecca Herron,
Yes.
David McLaughlin. Oh, he left the meeting.
Yes.
Sorry. Alan Watkins
Yes. I had a voice left. Yes.
and Clinton Wells. Thank. Did I miss anyone online or in person?
I must just tell you while Lead is counting those votes that the sound is cutting out every now and again. So there is a problem with the sound. So people online can't hear every single thing you say. Every now and again, they only hear a small portion of what you say.
I agree with that.
Okay.
If there's 8 yays, how many were roll?
12. I counted 7 yays though.
I had Rebecca, Al, 1, 2. Tim, yes, 3.
Yep.
Jason, yes, 4. Ruby, yes, 5. Denise, yes, 6. Robert, yes, 7. And then I had one person who I couldn't identify that was online say yes, and they were after Glenn.
Jason?
Jason.
I had Jason, but
No, you're
somebody was-
counting. You're
Tamara.
counting. No, Tamara did not vote yes.
It was Rebecca,
It was Rebecca. Did I that?
I think.
There's somebody between Glenn and Rebecca.
Larry Gross, but he voted against it.
Oh,
Larry Grace
okay.
voted no.
No.
So I have 7 out of 12 yays.
The motion passes.
Okay, the motion passes to endorse C with revisions.
Fair to say that, you know, why we chose it, you know, that is one of the 2 that the consultant recommended. It looked like, you know, it was gonna be cheaper than A out of A and C. Yeah, and that, none of us were strongly opposed to B2, I think.
No, I think a lot of us
If we were
prefer
ranking them, I
B2,
think
Yeah.
B2 would come in probably.
but
second.
it's a compromise, which is what we had to do, and that's okay.
I agree. Now, moving forward. Someone's going to policy committee to endorse this, correct?
Yes, correct.
I believe, as the chairman, it should be a representative from Stafford County. And Ruby, I'm looking at you. Unless Al wants to do it.
I should go together.
Well,
You can't vote for one person should speak.
Okay.
You're the voice.
but we should work together on what is presented and have it presented.
I'm gonna make a note that Tim, because you're traditionally the representative, but you're designating a
I would
representative
like
of
to
CTAC
designate
to
somebody
speak.
from Stafford, because Spotsy is
All right.
out to lunch on this one, honestly.
I trust this communication will be clear that this is not a unanimous vote.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the reason why we did a roll call. Why I went through and wrote folks' names. and
I
who did
respect
this
your
I was
position.
gonna say, we
I do
all
respect
respect
your
your
decision very
position,
much.
Rupert, we do.
Another reason why I don't like C is because if you look at where it connects to Shelton Boulevard, there's 2 apartment complexes one on each side, but they're not lined up.
He said we might have.
Yeah, well, they're not lined up. Okay, so the problem is you're gonna have to have traffic lights at those 2. And you're gonna probably have to have a traffic light on Shelton. So that's 3 traffic lights within 800 feet. So I think that's problematic.
I think what we're gonna have to modify is.
you told you Lavoggy rounds out there?
We're
I don't think it can fit.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for, making me that.
But we won't.
All right, I'm gonna skip C.
I would just say, please bring us future topics for consideration to the next
Um,
meeting. So
Next
email me if you
Okay.
want. So what is important to you? that
No
is
more
part of
river
our project.
crossings for a couple of months. How about that? Staff report,
Very quick.
quickly.
Congestion mitigation, air quality, and surface transportation block grants is actually a group of funds that FAMPO hands out to its jurisdictions. We have a methodology currently in place. However, there's been interest to revise it. There's a presentation you can do it. This is basically something that was presented to the technical advisory committee. So this jurisdiction staff. They're also the applicants, and this is the item where there's about $6 million each year available. And to put it nicely, the jurisdictions are fighting over this money because it is zero sum. So we're looking at re-updating it. Currently it's a project by project. The recent results is that since the new methodology, Spotsylvania has been able to grab over half the pot. Stafford is getting about 25% of the pot and Fredericksburg's about 10%. And then there's a couple other regional groups of money. So it's the current methodology is creating a little bit of imbalance. Nobody ever likes being the loser, and definitely not loser consistently when you're fighting for issues to proceed. And so we are looking at a new way that potentially split the pot of funding to the jurisdictions that they have both a little bit more control over which projects they want to fund, because right now they have to throw their best project from a scoring methodology at it, which might not be what the political will is, as well as it can, if it's 2 projects funded in each category, one jurisdiction can walk away with everything, and that can but there's no guarantee that that jurisdiction will be able to get it the next year. So there's a little bit more uncertainty. I would start saying paying attention to this process, because this is what funds, say, sidewalks in jurisdictions. This funds transit items. It funds roadway projects. It's not going to build a road, but it's used for match for the smart scale process, as well as engineering and other items. So this is how you seed projects for bigger pots. So there's always a swing to this. I won't lie, we update this every 2 or 3 years because the new process creates a new groups of winners and losers. And of course, if not everybody's being able to win at least something, they are like, we need to change the rules. So that's in process. It's in front of the TAC, the staff, which are also the applicants. And so please be aware that this is going on. And if you want to start having conversations over this, they haven't been able to meet due to weather and other things. This was supposed to be presented, I think, back in December. That got canned. We're supposed to present it earlier this week. That actually got canned. And so this is something that y'all need to pay attention to in the future. I'll bring it back to the committee, but just be aware, we approve funding of these projects every 2 years, and we're slowly working our way towards that again. If you have questions, please reach out to me, because I also handle this project.
Yes, if I read this correctly, there are 3 different ways to go with splitting these funds. One, you can base it on how much road mileage each one of the jurisdictions has, which is what we're doing now, as I understand, basically.
No, it's a project by project, and it's scored on everything from air quality benefit to safety concerns to cost.
What about the 331?
These are all proposals. They basically asked us to simplify. We're not going to compare projects across jurisdictions. Bring us something that we can figure out how to divide up this pot based on some type of empirical metric. So population was one that we talked about. We looked at vehicle miles traveled out of roadways. We looked at
Number 3, you're getting rid of number 3.
employment.
That's the one I like.
There's a lot of different ones. And then the 331, there's a weird agreement currently that the region gets a specific set of funds because of Stafford's TMA, Garrisonville. And currently they are designated that they are the only eligible applicant for bike, ped, and transit funds. And it has to go to kind of the Garrisonville TMA area.
Yeah.
The trick is they haven't always applied for the funds, and they're the only applicant. So that's kind of caused a weird little hiccup, or that they want to swap funds from a project not in the TMA, and TMA, we can't say, no, you can't quite do that. There's some restrictions just because there's an agreement in place that a certain set of funds. Otherwise, everything else is fair game. That Fredericksburg, you get all the roadway funding. They typically go heavily after active transportation projects. Spotsylvania's been doing like I-95, South Point, jug handle projects, seeding those projects. It's not a big pot of funds. Like these projects are getting $1 or $2 million a year. It's a $6 million pot, but that's not a lot for transportation projects in general. But it's good money for seeding to say, hey, I've already got a $5 million match. That's not coming out of, the county's taxes. So it's kind of a good little incentive. The trick is that if one jurisdiction's always getting it first, those because it's swamped. Like the last two sessions, Spotsylvania's done really well. Previously, that was Stafford, and so it always kind of
So just for clarification, does it apply to King George?
No, not currently. Now, as soon as if
That would
the
be-
urbanized area hits, and this is actually something that's probably Britain and Caroline more so than King George, they automatically come into FAMPO and they're automatically eligible to compete for those funds.
Okay.
And it's
I
not
know
something.
there's certain things they can and certain things they can't.
So there's a rural transportation pod. There's 7. This is solely for last ones, but could be 10 years. So they're doing that, yes.
The point I was trying to make is, in your presentation, one of the options of dividing up funds strikes me as being much more fair than the others. And that is the one, not the one that bases it on population, not the one that bases it on road mileage, the one that bases it on the amount of population per road mileage. These are the people who do the most efficient use of the roads. And I think they should be rewarded. So I was thinking the CTAC should go on record as being in favor of that way of dividing the funds.
We won't weigh into what's fair. That's for folks with bigger paychecks to do it, at least from FAMPO staff. But that is something that here's a whole bunch of ways to cut up the funds. You tell us what you think is the best way. And right now it's with the city staff, not the city staff, the jurisdiction staff, and they're also the applicants. So understand that they are posturing to make sure that they're in the best position. So I'm bringing this back. May I move forward? So you'll have more about this. CTAC did not meet, so that's done. Public outreach and acknowledgements.
Go ahead. None?
Do you have it?
Public outreach? No? Anyone?
Public comment?
Any public comment?
Yes.
Rosalind Reeder. I live at 110 Barnegat Drive in the senior community of Del Webb on the Celebrate Parkway. And so I just want to make a couple comments as to Mr. Watkins' presentation. The committee has made their vote and, I'll live with that. But I feel that you discounted public input, perhaps partially due to your characterization that the people in Celebrate, the 1,197 homes there, were whining about the noise and the pollution. Of the people that I've spoken to, the number one consideration is health and safety. These are all seniors. AARP has said the more seniors die making left turns at intersections. This road splits our community in half. One half of our community cannot get to the services of our community without crossing that road. There's only one sidewalk on one side. People have to walk across that road. As the traffic is increased, especially as more development happens along the parkway, I'm guessing that we're going to have stoplights. Okay. In order for us to be able to get across. Any future considerations that you have once we get to the design part about, how much delay there is or how much time it takes to get from here to there, needs to consider those traffic lights as well. But I would like for you to keep in mind, as you consider things in the future, that we are concerned about the health and safety. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the traffic lights are a given, so.
Any other public comment? Future agenda items, anyone? Not tonight? Rupert, would you like to make a motion for?
This is Rupert, move to adjourn.
Second. Thanks. All in favor?
Aye.
It's formally.
That's pretty solid.
Go, Brita.